This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, no, I'd be interested to see how the GTA's been impacted, and in fact the country as a whole. It just gives the numbers maybe a little more context.
Well, we'll put the whole thing into context now. It's 9 o'clock, so let's start the meeting. I'll call it to order. Can I have mover and seconder to confirm the agenda, please? Brian and Martin. Okay, any discussion on the agenda with the presentation amended as amended? Barbara.
You're muted, Barb.
No words are coming out.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I believe the clerk wanted it further amended to include the growth management study. So
okay.
A further amendment.
Okay, so it's the agenda as amended as further amended. Any discussion? Hearing none. Anyone opposed? That is carried. Any declaration of pecuniary interest can declare now or at any time through the meeting. Let Lindsay know with the paperwork. Now, mover and seconder to resolve into special meeting at 9:02. Sorry, I'm a little later. Usually it's 9:01. Mover and seconder for that, please. Okay, Martin and Jim. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Okay, that's carried. And mover and seconder to appoint a chair for the meeting. Mover Brian, you gonna move it?
That John Woodbury be the chair.
Got to send you a list of other names someday. Do I have a seconder? Michael will second that. Okay, are there any discussion on that or any other nominations or anything? Guess not. Anyone opposed to that? And that is carried. All right, so I'll swing my chair around and call myself a chair now. Okay, next. First up is Randy. So I don't know, Scott or Randy, I don't know if everyone knows Scott and Randy from the county. I guess, yeah, in here everybody would. So thanks guys for being here. And I'm gonna just be quiet and turn it over to you, Randy.
Well, thanks for inviting us for sure. And what we're gonna do is Scott's gonna go through the growth management study presentation. I'm gonna do the climate change action plan, kind of divided and conquered a little bit here. So Scott's gonna start us off, and then we're here, of course, to answer any questions on both those presentations. So I'll turn it over to Scott.
Great, thanks, Randy, and thanks, Mayor Woodbury and members of Southgate Council for having us here today. Just to do the tech check, can everyone see my screen there with the title slide of the growth management strategy? Perfect, okay, excellent. So I apologize to council and staff for not being able to get to this presentation a little earlier. We received the final work from the consultant yesterday morning and had to do a quick review and prepare our slides, so they weren't sent out till last night, but hopefully we can still have a good discussion here today. And certainly if there's anything that comes up after you've had a further review, county staff are certainly open to questions. So with that, we'll get into it. So what we have before us today is the culmination of Hempson Consulting's work with the input from our 9 member municipalities as well as county staff. And they were tasked with updating the county's growth forecasts and allocations to the year 2046. I should note, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, this document is still very much a draft document. We are seeking input, and I would note that this document has not been presented to County Council just yet. We hope to bring a presentation to Council in June of 2021. So with respect to the study objectives, we asked Hempson to do a few things. One is they were to look at our population and employment growth over the next 25 years, and that 25 years is important. I'll explain that in just a second. We also asked them to look at the current development land supply available, primarily in our settlement areas, to look at how we are in terms of having land available to accommodate that future growth that they're projecting. Based on the timing of when we started this study, which was in the second quarter of last year, we couldn't ignore the short and long-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic as well. So we asked them to give us their best guess on both those short and long-term impacts there. And then we also asked them to look at the long-term demographic trends and any policy changes that might be needed with respect to growth in that regard. And when I say these longer-term demographic trends, there's certain things that we know are happening in terms of how our population ages and our birth rates and such. So, you know, we know that the baby boomers in many cases are getting to the end of their careers and their working lives and choosing to retire. We also know that things like people like the millennials are starting to enter the workforce and now the housing market in force. So there's certain demographic trends that we can view over the longer term versus others that might be more short-term impacts or more specific growth-related impacts. With respect to the context, and I mentioned the 25 years, in 2020, the provincial policy statement was updated to extend the planning horizon, essentially how long we can plan for in our county and municipal official plans from the previous standard of 20 years to the current standard of 25 years. And the way it works in our two-tier planning system is in order for Southgate to take advantage of that 25-year horizon, the county first needs to update our own official plan. And with Recolor Gray being done so recently and knowing that a number of our municipalities are in the process of reviewing their official plans, we thought it prudent to review our growth allocations here fairly soon, such that when you do your municipal official plan updates, you could take advantage of those that extended planning horizon in that regard. And with respect to planning, certainly it is beneficial to look long term, knowing that we're going to constantly need to review and re-review those long-term projections in that regard, because you know nobody can see 25 years into the future with complete accuracy in that regard. Council will be aware that the provincial policy statement requires us to address the development pipeline, so to speak, and make sure we have enough land in our settlement areas. But there's also further emphasis on other factors that are impacting planning, including climate change, which Randy will be speaking to in the next presentation. With respect to growth in the province, areas around the edge of the Greater Golden Horseshoe are growing, and Gray is no different in that regard. And certainly in Southgate and in Dundalk more specifically, you've been on the front lines of receiving that growth for the past 5 to 10 years. And as you'll see later in this presentation, there's no indication that it's going to be stopping anytime soon. With respect to the pandemic, we wanted to look at to what extent people were choosing to come to Gray based on the pandemic, and would that be a short-term blip in terms of that they've chosen to relocate here and then they might move back to a city once the pandemic is over, or will that be more permanent in that regard? Other projections in terms of the working from home situation post-pandemic are also something that we and municipalities are going to need to keep an active eye on in that regard. So with respect to the outer ring Greater Golden Horseshoe municipalities, you can see that certainly in the past 5 years from this slide, most of the outer ring counties and regions have been growing quite significantly. The one thing I would point out on this slide is that each of those little graphs you see is on a different scale. So Simcoe County is in the range of 0 to 15,000 versus Gray, for example, is in the range of 0 to 2,000. But one thing you will see when you look at Gray County is from the periods of about 2006 to 2015, we either had very low growth or in some years even declining growth levels. But from 2016 to 2020, and we could actually extend that into 2021 now since we have the numbers there, our growth has just shot up, similar to many other communities. And so the key question when we look at a graphic like this is, okay, if it's shot up within the last 5 years, What will it do in the next 5 years, next 10 years, 20 years, or in this case, 25 years? So as much as we need to be cognizant of the current conditions, we also need to be thinking longer term to determine what the needs of our communities are going to be, again, 25 years into the future. With respect to some of the inputs that went into this project, of course, I mentioned things like the baby boomers and the millennials earlier, and so we have a handle on some of those populations. But we also looked at various data sources, including the most recent information that we could get from Statistics Canada, and it's kind of nice that we're doing this presentation today, the day after our Census 2021 forms were due. So hopefully everyone was able to complete their census, because that really is a key piece of data to this type of exercise. And certainly once we get the results from the 2021 census, which is likely to come later in 2022, we'll need to go back and look at these numbers to dig in deeper to see whether or not we're on track in that regard. Some of the other data sources we used were Ministry of Finance projections, as well as our own local information. And when I say local information, I mean building permits that your building official would be issuing, as well as the planning applications and what's in the pipeline. So we would look at, our plans of subdivision and condominium and what's draft approved versus registered versus actively being built out. And I should give kudos to both Clinton Stredwick and Dave Milner here. They were instrumental in helping supply this information to the county. And in fact, we had an earlier draft of the growth management strategy that Dave and Clint were great at supplying us some very detailed input on. And it has shown in these final projections, you will see an increase in Southgate from what was in those earlier projections. With respect to the employment side, we tend to break the employment into 3 different categories. The first is population related. When we talk about population related employment, we think about those needs, whether they be stores or restaurants, or government services or education that serve our local population. And as our local population grows, then so too do those population related employment sectors. With respect to the second category, which we call employment land, this would refer more specifically to our industrial and business parks that we would see in our settlement areas. So your Eco Park in Dundalk would be a great example of this. This is where we see some of our higher order employment in terms of manufacturing or wholesale or warehousing or construction industries in that regard. And these employment land employment opportunities are key indicators and key drivers of some of the population growth in our communities, i.e. if we have good jobs and job opportunities available in our communities, it stands to reason that people are going to want to A, stay in the community, or B, relocate to the community. And finally, we also look at our rural employment opportunities. These are everything from some of our on-farm on-farm sales of farm products to agritourism opportunities. So maybe it might be like a bed and breakfast or a rural Airbnb in that regard, to some of the small scale manufacturing that we see on farms. And certainly in the south part of the county and in Southgate, the Mennonite population is driving a lot of this rural employment growth in that regard. And so that's definitely a key indicator that we need to look for when we're considering places like Southgate and Grey County. I won't pretend to completely understand this slide. This is the methodology that Hempson uses to look at both the residential and employment forecasts. You'll see there's a number of factors in there that one would expect when you're looking at say, a residential forecast in terms of, immigration and emigration, how many people are moving to the community versus how many people might be leaving. You have things like birth and mortality rates, which again are all fairly standard. But then you have things that are maybe under further municipal control in that regard. So that would be the availability of serviced development land, the policies at both the county and the municipal levels, the building permits being issued, and things of that nature. And as I said, The employment forecasts are key to helping determine the residential forecast in that regard. So what are the job opportunities in the municipality, and what types of jobs are there? Are they primarily service sector jobs, or are there other job opportunities available that might be slightly higher paying in that regard? And so all of these feed into the forecast in this regard. I should say, and we'll get to it at a later slide, one of the forecasts that we need to consider in Grey County, which is a little different than some other communities, is the amount of seasonal residences we have. So whether that be someone that owns a cottage on an inland lake or on Georgian Bay, or whether that be someone that owns, say, a chalet closer to the ski resorts. And those seasonal forecasts aren't as driven by some of the traditional factors we would consider in a residential forecast, such as fertility rates and mortality rates. So it's really a different type of forecast, and we'll get to that, as I said, a little later on. So with respect to looking at our growth and growth needs moving forward, one of the key metrics is, of course, the availability of development land. And for the purposes of these two tables, the consultant hasn't considered vacant rural and agricultural land in that regard. While we know there could still be some future houses built there, and we know that that farmers are actively farming our lands, this isn't going to be the focus of new residential and employment growth in that regard, although they will contribute in a manner to that. So we look at our primary settlement areas, again, the areas like Dundalk, as well as looking at our secondary settlement areas, and in some parts of the county, the recreational resort areas or the inland lakes and shoreline. And so while Southgate doesn't have any recreational resort areas, they certainly do have inland lakes and shoreline as well as secondary settlement areas. And so when we look at this, the top chart gives a little indicator on where we were at in terms of available land supply in 2018 versus where we were at in 2020. And then the bottom table breaks it down into what we have in each of our 9-member municipalities with respect to the primary and secondary settlement areas in that regard. And you can see in most cases, certainly there has been a reduction in the available land supply, and that would stand to reason as we see more development. So with respect to the forecast overall, it's no surprise Grey County is growing. When you look at this table, which stretches from 1986 to the future projection of 2046, we definitely see relatively steady growth, other than a brief blip in 2011. But what we're seeing in 2021, 2026, and even into the 2030s is a higher growth rate than we've experienced since about the late 80s and early 90s. And there's a number of factors contributing to this, again, including in some cases some of the baby boomers choosing to move to Grey, to retire here. We are seeing in the southern part of Grey, like Southgate, more commuter traffic in terms of people choosing to live in Grey County and commute to jobs to the south. And then we are seeing the impacts of the millennial population being in the prime of their working and home buying age in that regard. We did ask Kempson in this regard if the market increase in growth was due to great county and municipal planning, and they didn't even crack a smile in that regard. So we tried. With respect to the forecast, we need to look at what the population increase is projected to be, but we also need to look at what the household increase is projected to be. And so when I say household in this case, household can generally be used synonymous with the term residential unit. So if you had one single detached dwelling with no basement apartments in it, or no apartments above the garage, then that would be one unit, versus if you had a duplex, then that would be 2 units. And the one thing to note here, which is actually very interesting, is that not all Grey County municipalities are the same in terms of their age demographic and their family size. So what we'll see as we move through some of these further slides is that Southgate, for example, looks very different than Owen Sound, in that Southgate generally has a younger population, and also larger family sizes than some of our other communities. So the numbers between the population growth and the household growth aren't necessarily even in that regard. And the one thing we can point to is all of our 9-member municipalities are certainly growing, both in terms of population and household. But you'll see here, we're projected to grow by about 11,500 households in this regard. And so if we think about that just over the next 25 years, where are we going to house those people? Where are we going to see those new units? And what types of new units are we going to see over that period? Are they going to be single detached, semi-detached, row houses, or apartment units? And again, the answer to those questions will look very different across our communities and our settlement areas across the county. So with respect to that, the consultant has given us a very rough projection of what that unit breakdown might look like, again, across the county. We know that this is a very rough projection, and we know that there's many factors that could cause this to change over the 25-year planning horizon. Everything from recessions to the impacts of new Canadians choosing to settle in our area, to the availability and pricing of construction materials. There's lots of things that can have a factor on whether or not someone chooses to buy or rent a home or an apartment or a townhouse. So these are to be taken with a large grain of salt in that regard, and it's something that we're going to need to continue to monitor in that regard. The other thing that I neglected to mention that could have a huge impact on this type of thing would be planning policy, whether at the county, local level, or even the provincial level. Certainly communities within the growth plan area have to meet a very different standard than communities like Grey County and Southgate that are outside of the growth plan in terms of residential density. Oops. So when we look at our employment picture, again, we see that Grey County is growing in this regard, but the one marked difference is we aren't growing from an employment perspective quite as quickly as we are from a residential growth perspective. And this is true for a lot of rural municipalities, a lot of rural Ontario that's seeing growth. A decent portion of rural Ontario's growth is based on baby boomers retiring from larger cities like the Greater Toronto Area, Kitchener, Waterloo, Guelph, and moving to places like Grey County. And when they move to places like Grey County, obviously they're not entering the job market. So it stands to reason that we will be seeing greater residential growth than we will employment growth. But in terms of if we're thinking long-term, we need to think about what this means once that demographic cohort has completely moved through the system and passed on in that regard. So those are some of the things that we need to look at just longer term in that regard. But we will see over the next 25 years, we do have fairly steady employment growth in that regard. And that's actually a bit of a difference from the past 5 to 10 years where we did actually see some declines in that regard. Again, if we break that employment growth into the different categories that we talked about earlier in terms of the population-related employment, the rural employment or the employment land, the consultant has given us their projections on what we're to see in that regard. And the rural employment will be less than the other two, but that's consistent with the trends we've seen in the past number of years where we are seeing steady growth in rural employment, but in terms of the total number of jobs, it doesn't measure up to some of those other growth categories in that regard. With respect to the population growth, this looks at the growth numbers in terms of the amount of population we're growing by. So you can see almost 23,000 people over the next 25 years for the county as a whole. And then when you break it down to the 9-member municipalities, you can see that some are certainly growing at a much more rapid rate than others. And Southgate is definitely in that upper echelon of municipalities that are growing very quickly. So we've got the city of Owen Sound, the town of Blue Mountains, the town of Hanover, and Southgate that are really growing significantly, and in some cases significantly faster than some of our other municipalities like the Township of Chatsworth in that regard. I will say that this is something that, again, we need to continually monitor and update. And you know, if I was making the same presentation to you 25 years ago, the numbers probably would have looked very differently. And I don't think there was too many people that were predicting the amount of growth that we're seeing today in some places like the Township of Southgate. So this is something that we do our best on in terms of the current projection, but we're continually reflecting on that and monitoring that. And so I will say here, I'd like you to take note of the fact that Southgate is growing by approximately almost 3,000 people here. And then the City of Owen Sound is growing by 2,400 people. And I just say this as a comparison based on what you're going to see in the next slide, because the next slide is the households. And although we said that Southgate was growing by almost 3,000 people, in this regard, the township is projected to grow by about 1,200 households, versus the City of Owen Sound, which was growing by about 2,400 people, is projected to grow by almost 1,600 households. And this really comes back to the types of residential units that are projected to be built in these communities, but also the family sizes. So if in the City of Owen Sound, we have a large number of retirees and empty nesters coming to the community, then they will need more housing units than we would to house larger families like we might be seeing in places like Southgate. But again, even when we look at the share of the growth here, it's the Blue Mountains, the Southgates, the Hanovers, and the Owen Sounds that are really driving the growth here in terms of the number of households that we project to see constructed over the next 25 years. And then again, if we look at the best guess projections on the types of units that we'll see constructed, this is where we get into some of those differences in family size and unit type in that regard. And we're fully aware that this is a table that could very much change. Even in the last 10 years, we've seen far more interest in things like semi-detached units and row houses across our communities. So we fully expect this to change. But this is a projection on the unit growth that we could see across the 9-member municipalities over the 25 years. With respect to employment, again, we're seeing high amounts of employment growth across the county, particularly in some of our bigger communities, and again, Southgate is right up there with the leaders in that regard, only behind Hanover, Blue Mountains, and Owen Sound. And this, I should note that this is all employment, so this is the rural, the population related, and the employment land growth in that regard. And we'll get into a further slide here that breaks that down. With respect to employment, we dug in with the consultant on this one to figure out exactly what this means. So this includes people that would be employed in a standard workplace. It includes self-employed people, but it's only counting the number of jobs. So if a single individual had 2 jobs, then we're counting the jobs here, not the individuals. And so then if we look at the breakdown of the 3 categories of employment, you'll see how that all pans out. Of course, Hanover and Owen Sound don't have any rural employment because they don't have any rural lands. With respect to the township, we are seeing the biggest growth sector in the population-related employment growth, and that would stand to reason based on the sheer number of people we're seeing choosing to relocate to Southgate and Dundalk in that regard. We're seeing still steady growth in the employment land and slightly lower growth in the rural employment sectors in that regard. And then this is the slide I referenced earlier. This one in particular might not impact Southgate quite as much as it may impact some communities like Blue Mountains or Sacred Highlands. But this is trying to get a handle on the amount of seasonal homes that we would project across the county. And when I say seasonal homes, it's a very difficult thing to measure because a single home over its lifespan can transform many times between seasonal and non-seasonal. So, for example, someone could buy a home as their cottage or their second home, and then the person they sell it to could move there permanently, and then that could switch back and forth many times over the lifespan of a home. At the end of the day, when we're looking at our seasonal homes, we still need to be prepared from an infrastructure perspective. We still need garbage pickup, we still need the roads, we still need the water and sewer services and everything else if they're in our settlement areas to service those. But in some cases, those seasonal homes have a slightly different demographic makeup than we might see in some of our permanent homes. And, for example, if you owned a cottage or a seasonal home, you're unlikely to be sending your kids to school in Grey County versus if that same home was a permanent unit, then there'd be other services that they might be using and taking advantage of at the municipal and county levels in that regard. You will see, though, it is relatively steady growth in the amount of seasonal homes across the growth horizon there. And so if we drill down a little more specifically on what all this means for Southgate, in the past roughly 5 years, Southgate has added more than 1,000 permanent residents, which is absolutely massive and a huge amount of growth and certainly change in your community. When talking to Dave and Clint and the consultant in this regard, they don't see any reason to believe that this growth is going to stop anytime soon. Certainly, it might slow down a little bit as we get later on into the forecast period, but we are still predicting a significant amount of growth in Southgate and the lion's share of that being in Dundalk. One of the things the consultant pointed out, which isn't a surprise, is both the county and the township need to actively monitor the land supply, and obviously your staff are doing a great job of that, as well as the servicing capacity to meet the needs of this growth. And we've had local examples very recently of communities that have had trouble keeping up with that servicing capacity, and it's just so crucial to making sure that we're truly planning ahead to meet the needs of our communities and our growth in that regard. I shouldn't neglect, though, that there's many other services that we need to plan ahead on and think about as we move forward in terms of our recreational services, things like our libraries, our waste management, and everything else. It's not just the water and sewer pipes, but those are the ones that often get pointed to in that regard. The other thing we've seen, of course, as a result of the pandemic is the need for increased growth in broadband across all of our communities and rural areas. And as I said earlier, with respect to Southgate and with respect to the county as a whole, these growth forecasts do need to be updated from time to time, and certainly the next logical update will be after we get the detailed data sets from the 2021 census, which are unlikely to arrive till late 2022 or even into 2023 in that regard. With respect to the impacts of the pandemic, the consultant was quick to point out that Grey County's growth and Southgate's growth in this regard predated the pandemic. So it's not something that we can simply say it's a case of urban flight whereby everybody's trying to escape the Greater Golden Horseshoe and come to beautiful locations like Southgate and Grey County. We were already on that upward trajectory prior to the pandemic. Certainly, we haven't seen a slowdown in growth at all, and if anything, we've seen an increase in growth throughout the past year and a bit during the pandemic period. Anecdotally, we're seeing evidence to suggest that some of those seasonal homes across the county are being occupied on more of a permanent basis so far during the pandemic, but it will remain to be seen whether that becomes a permanent move for some of those people or whether it's a temporary thing as they ride out the current situation. We've definitely seen impacts on our economy as a result of the pandemic, and certain industries like food service and accommodation have certainly taken a significant hit in that regard. The consultant was hopeful that these professions would rebound following the pandemic, and although there were some job losses during this period, they're hopeful that we'll see growth in the coming years in that regard. One of the key impacts we've seen during the pandemic, and we've felt it across all of our communities, is the need for quality outdoor recreation spaces of all seasons during the pandemic. People were really looking to get outdoors, go for hikes or experience some of the natural beauty that makes Gray such a great place to live. And so that's certainly something, if we are thinking about policy updates beyond simply changing the numbers going forward, we might think about updating our county and township official plans to really better spell out some of our recreation policies and our park plan policies in that regard, because we really have seen the importance of these features in our communities, and in some cases the overcrowding of these features. And I know at the county, we're actively looking at our parking needs for certain features like our county forest in that regard moving forward. With respect to some of the longer term impacts of the pandemic, the consultant said it's really too early to tell whether certain trends will be short term or long term. Specifically, the working from home phenomenon, will that continue post pandemic? Will we see more and more people choose to work from home, even though their jobs might technically be in the Greater Toronto area or even elsewhere? Or will they return to those offices and workplaces following the pandemic? It's something we'll have to keep an eye on, but we simply don't know yet. And especially given the current lockdown, it's just too early to tell. So with respect to the next steps, and I apologize, I've rambled on here a while, but I'm almost done. We're looking to receive any further feedback on the draft update to the growth management strategy. We are looking to bring a report to County Council in June with a recommendation, and that recommendation would simply be that Council receive the updated growth report from Hempson, and that we undertake a county official plan amendment to implement the number changes in that regard in terms of the growth forecasts and allocations, both at the residential side and the employment side. As part of that official plan amendment process, there would be public consultation. Members of the public, the development community would certainly have their opportunity for input, as would all 9 of our member municipalities and some of the agencies that work alongside us in the planning field. From there, we'd work with the member municipalities to update their own planning documents, such as their official plans in that regard, and then regularly review this growth management strategy and numbers to ensure that it reflects the most recent numbers and trends in growth. And as I said, it's a mixture of looking at what the current trends are versus trying to predict what those longer trends might be in terms of growth in that regard. So with that, that's all I have to say in this regard. Certainly happy to take any questions, and if Randy has anything further to add, I'd certainly invite him through the chair to add anything further there.
Thanks very much, Scott. Randy, did you want to add anything?
Nothing further to add. Just prior to the presentation, Deputy Mayor Milne asked a question in terms of, what's happening elsewhere. And although that one slide does show some communities in terms of what's happening, we did recently connect in on a county planning directors call, which is county planning directors across all of Ontario. And we are seeing, at least from an Ontario perspective, that everyone is speaking to an overall increase in growth. So at least throughout the province, that's what seems to be happening. Even in Eastern Ontario and other parts, the people from that part of our province were speaking to pretty much the same, that they're seeing a increase in development activity through actual applications as well as building permit activities. So that is a trend that seems to be happening at least throughout the province, and we can dig into further to see what's happening from a national perspective as well.
Okay, thank you. Brian.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Randy, for that, and thanks, Scott, for a good presentation. The reason I asked that question was because a lot of people suspect that there's an out migration from the GTA, but in fact, if the numbers are as you indicate they are, that may be the case, but they're not going to go back to the city likely, because the city is absorbing new immigrants in all likelihood that are backfilling those, housing units, I guess. Scott, to go back to your early in your presentation, you indicated that there's a obligation to make sure there is sufficient land for growth available. I'm wondering at what point, or is there a point where the value of the farmland that's being consumed by those employment lands, housing lands, becomes a tipping point where it's no longer socially acceptable to chew up that farmland to simply accommodate the employment lands or the housing, and we need to intensify further those employment and housing lands.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
In 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Or less.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. It's a great point, Councillor Milman, and it's something that, you know, if we were in the growth plan, the province prescribes very specific targets for the number of both jobs per hectare and people per hectare that we would need to meet. So if there was ever a move to bring the county into the growth plan, then we would have those numbers given to us, so to speak, or dictated to us. In this case, we are cognizant of trying to preserve, obviously, our agricultural lands, and you know, over the past 10 to 15 years, the county has moved towards intensifying in our settlement areas, both in terms of infill opportunities, but also in terms of looking at higher densities in our new subdivisions, and we are seeing more interest, as I said, in things like apartment units, and in Southgate with all the flat out development, there's more interest for sure. So I'm not sure, you know, exactly what that balance will be going forward, but it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on, and the province is increasingly issuing more prescriptions on what needs to be done before we can consider growing out, in terms of assessing the impact on farmland in that regard, and assessing whether or not we're building an efficient density so that we're growing up and not out for the most part.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Scott. I don't know if Dave or Clint wanted to make any comments or first impressions well, it won't be your first because you've been involved more with supplying information of the report. Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Scott and Randy, for the presentation. It was very informative. I just want to take you to this magical chart that I definitely do not understand, and hopefully Scott can give us a lesson on it someday. But this chart, and I'm referring to this residential and employment forecast methodology chart with all the arrows, but the proximity of Southgate and West Grey to, you know, kind of that southern employment area, like Alliston, Orangeville for us, and Toronto, Greater Toronto area, Brampton, so on. Was that taken into account, our proximity to those areas, as being, we don't like it, but we are residential bedroom community that service those employment areas because we're affordable compared to southern residents' property values? I'm just wondering if that was taken into account. The other thing was future growth. It appears that it's somewhat, the future growth is somewhat controlled by this. Although, what if we outgrew these numbers? So developer involvement in employment lands is, we're seeing that taking off kind of in 3 to 4 year delay when residential growth really started happening in Southgate. So we're just wondering if there is some future growth anticipation taken into account here with regard to employment lands and vacant lands available, because developers are gobbling up land and then coming to us and saying, hey, now we want to develop it. You indicated that the housing unit types are rough projections. What if we extremely exceed, like your 25-year projections? What if we gobble that up in 6 or 7 years? I think council should know, are we stymied by that, or do we make adjustments and pivot and continue on at the same growth rate? And then I would take you to the allocation of households by unit type. It shows only a growth of 40 units in apartments on that one slide over the 25-year horizon. And that's the way I'm interpreting, because it's saying 2021 has 120 units of apartments right now, and by 2046 it'll be 160. So that's a growth of 40. We're seeing a development that has 250 alone, so that's coming forward. Other than that, I think again, I reflect on the fourth last slide, Township of Southgate, these numbers of 1,000 permanent residents between 2016 and 2020. And yet over the next 25 years, we're only looking at 3,000 resident increases, where I think if you would, in discussions with Clint, between Clint and I, we see likely the township doubling its size in that 25-year horizon. But I'll leave, those are just comments that I think should be out there for discussion.
Thanks, Dave. And I think to add to your bedroom communities traveling commuting type thing, even pre-pandemic, we've get out there on either Highway 10 or 6 or 89 at about 5, 6 in the morning on a weekday, and they're heading everywhere from Guelph to Barrie and right across. So that's, you're down to the GTA. So the employment out of the county is huge for our community right now. Clint, did you want to add anything to that?
I'm still absorbing the numbers here and looking at them, but I guess my one concern is that as council knows, we're going through a process now to look at expanding the settlement area for Dundalk, and I guess my concern is that how the numbers match up to how we're going ahead with it, and how that will limit or not the expansion of Dundalk. So I haven't worked out yet, based on seeing this new information, how that might have its impacts, but that's certainly my concern, is how that will affect our growth study for expanding the settlement area for Dundalk.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Randy or Scott, if you want to comment on any of Dave or Clint's. Scott, I see your mic on. Go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to some of the comments that Dave made and the other comments, I'll try to tackle a few of them, and Randy can jump in too. With respect to that confusing table, which showed the residential and employment forecasts, the consultant certainly did consider outside influences, in terms of in the south of the county, people commuting to places like Alliston or the GTA in that regard. The one thing I will note is, this study, because it had to encompass the whole county, is done to a certain degree at, maybe a 50,000-foot level. In terms of it tries to look at all the information available, including all the information supplied by each of our 9 member municipalities, and the more information that was supplied, sort of the more realistic the results will be. But it doesn't maybe get down into some of the micro levels that some municipalities will wish for, and that they may wish to pursue as part of their own official plan updates in that regard. And when we look at this chart that Dave was referring to, there's certainly a number of factors depending on where you are in the county. As Dave pointed out, in the south of the county, you're influenced by certain factors. There's other municipalities that are influenced by the refurbishment and upgrades at Bruce Power, and then on the eastern end of the county, there's municipalities that are influenced by some of the growth in Simcoe County in that regard. So while it does attempt to project and plan for the entire county, county staff are well aware that there's location-specific factors that need to be further delved into and further considered at a community level, and that's where certainly we'd like to work with municipal staff and councils to consider some of those as part of the municipal updates in that regard. With respect to the comment on the number of apartment units, Dave, I completely agree with you. It's something we raised with the consultant, but knowing that we had the presentation due today, we couldn't go back to them and say update it because we needed to show something. So we fully expect that that there will be higher amounts of apartment units in places like Dundalk, and that might come on top of the growth we're already projecting, or that might come in part at the expense of some of the lower density growth forms. So maybe we see slightly less single detached dwellings and more apartments in that regard. With respect to sort of the overall growth projections and the fact that Southgate has grown by roughly 1,000 people in the past 5-ish years and is only projected to grow by, I say only, but still significant, is projected to grow by 3,000 people in the next 25 years. That is the best guess, the best projection at this stage in time, but we're fully cognizant that we're going to need to continue to monitor that. I should have said at the outset of my presentation that the county did its first growth management strategy in 2007. We did another one in 2015. We did another one in 2018, and we're doing another one in 2021. And you know, what we've seen in 2021 is already that we are outpacing what was projected in even the 2018 study. So we know that you know, we need to make a realistic projection, and I shouldn't use the term best guess, but I keep using it, a realistic best guess in this regard. But for the purposes of planning for our communities, and certainly for the purposes of planning for your own municipal infrastructure, we need to make sure these numbers are as accurate as possible and as realistic as possible, because we certainly don't want to either underbuild or overbuild our infrastructure in that regard, and it has an impact on your municipal bottom line there. With respect to Clint's comment about, you know, what this would mean for the expansion of the settlement area of Dundalk, we're certainly happy to work with township staff in that regard, as well as the development community. And you know, if there's further information that comes forward to suggest that, you know, these numbers are on the low side, then we're happy to consider that. We're happy to consider that either now, or we're happy to consider it in 3 to 5 years time, once we have further data to suggest that, hey, in the last 5 years we've grown by 1,000 people, and in the next 3 years we grew by an additional, you know, 400 people, or whatever that number ends up being. So it's going to be, you know, unfortunately a moving target there. And I guess the final thing I'll say is that these numbers are still draft, and we highly value the input of township staff, people like the building official and the planning department, and economic development, who's answering these inquiries on both the residential and employment side, because you truly are the boots on the ground, and you in many cases hear about this growth and have your ear to the ground there before even county planning staff do. So if you do have any additional comments once you've had a chance to digest the documents that were sent around yesterday, please do share those with us. We're happy to make those available to the consultant and see if that changes the numbers at all. As I said, Clint and Dave gave us excellent feedback on the previous draft, and that resulted in a higher forecast for Southgate. So with further feedback, it might further change those numbers. Because this consultant in the past has often told us they would rather undercount the amount of growth than overcount in this regard. So they're happy to come back to us in 3 years' time and said, yeah, we were wrong, you're growing even more quickly than we thought, versus, you know, having somebody build and design infrastructure for a much higher population base and say, oh, sorry, we were wrong, you only got, you know, half the growth you thought. So, you know, it's not perfect, but based on what we have in front of us, we think that this is a relatively realistic projection, subject to, of course, further feedback from both council and staff in this regard. So again, I'm rambling, sorry, I'll turn it over to Randy if he has anything further.
Okay, Randy.
Thank you, Chair Woodbury. And yeah, in terms of just what Scott indicated, in terms of definitely on the apartments and the higher density housing, what we've been seeing in a number of our communities, and what we know that is in the development pipeline, so to speak, we're going to see a lot more apartment units for sure. And we already, like I said, seeing that in the last for sure 2 to 3 years based on some of the data that we have been able to analyze using information from local municipalities and from MPAC. So it is something we want to have some further discussions with both local municipal staff as well as HEMSN, because we think that based on some of the trend we're seeing, we're going to see less single semis and more row houses and apartments as a percent wise based on historical numbers that we've seen in the past. And that's being driven by policies within our official plans, that's being also driven by other incentive programs, there are community improvement plan programs, as well as things like development charge exemptions that the county council has approved to promote more rental apartments. So we think that trend is going to continue, especially with some of those incentives that are being provided. So that's something that for sure we need to monitor, but I think we need to have some further discussions with local municipal staff and the consultants on for sure. So, and as Scott indicated through the presentation, this is quote best guess, I guess, is what Scott's indicated too. But it's only as good as the data and information that we have, and like Scott said, Dave and Clint have been excellent in terms of providing the best information that we have. And if there's further information, we can provide that for sure to HEMSN, and we just need to continue to monitor this collectively between county and municipal staff. We need to continue to monitor it. Hopefully we'll get that census data. That will be another milestone confirmation in terms of where we're at. Or, did we get the estimates right even in terms of where we're currently at? Right now we're projecting that our total population for the county has already hit the 100,000 population mark. That's a significant number. So we want to make sure that once we get those census results in, did we in fact hit that 100,000 mark based on what we're estimating, what HEMSN is estimating at this stage. So just things like that we just need to continue to monitor and continue to collect that data and information that really goes into providing the analysis and the best guess, so to speak, in terms of where we think we're going in the next 25 even plus years, especially when we're getting into discussions on infrastructure. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Randy and Scott. Are there any other questions or comments? Brian, and then or Martin hasn't had a turn yet, so we'll go to Martin first, then Brian. Go ahead, Martin.
Oh, thanks, John. Yeah, good morning, Scott. This is for you. Great presentation, a lot of information, I must admit, but 3 things that stuck out for me. We're talking about vacant land, settlement areas, which the township is doing for Dundalk, and employment lands for business growth. And then you also mentioned that, and I think Clinton has mentioned this before in some reports, there's that mathematical formula for how many people for acreage or vice versa, and that can be dictated by the province. Is there a formula applied to the industrial lands to the size of factories or warehouses? Is there a correlation there? Just because I started thinking, if we have that important employment lands full with industry, small manufacturing, that's going to affect the housing. And so it's like a question of what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is it far better to concentrate now, since we have so much growth residential? Would it be, and we do have that business park and another one coming up, but shouldn't it be a little bit more on the forecast down the road too, to really pump more businesses? Because that's the only way Southgate is going to stop being a bedroom community, right? So any thoughts on that, or just impressions from the whole presentation that they just popped in my head? So
those are great comments, and through you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to employment lands, the county plan currently doesn't have a target density for that. Some of our neighbors to the south, and as I said, some of those communities in the growth plan are bound by a factor of the number of jobs per hectare versus in Grey County, we set a very specific target residential density in terms of the number of residential units per net hectare. We don't do so for employment lands. And in terms of employment lands, that number is so variable, and it's very difficult to plan for. And I don't use this as an excuse, but even if you think of, you know, a use that might go into your eco park in that regard, you know, if you had a warehousing type use, it could, you know, occupy a large swath of land, but actually employ, you know, very few people. Versus if you had a certain type of more labor intensive manufacturing facility, you might occupy a significant amount of more people, or if you had, you know, an office building in that regard. So we don't have a prescriptive number in terms of saying, you know, 1 hectare of employment land will equal Y number of jobs. But what we would recommend, and what Southgate has always been good at, is planning ahead in that regard, and making sure that you have available land both in your business park, but also throughout other areas of Dundalk to meet all types of employment needs, from those population employment, so maybe more commercial land, to the more standard either manufacturing or even if we're getting into office style development in that regard. And certainly the work that Southgate has done in the last number of years in terms of looking at that industrial access road out to Highway 10 and the long-term planning there is just exemplary, and that's what we'd like to see in all our communities. Because you're right that the key to ensuring that our communities aren't just bedroom communities is being able to provide those quality jobs for our businesses and upcoming entrepreneurs in our home communities in that regard. So I know that doesn't totally answer your question, but that's probably the best I have at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. For the most part, Scott answered my question on his in his admittedly rambling answer there. So that's good. Thank you.
See, it works sometimes. Are there any other questions or comments? Barbara?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Woodbury. I had a couple of things, Scott, to Councillor Shipton's comment about the chicken and egg. One of my comments was, which comes first? Are the developers buying up land because, you know, the property owner of the farmland will sell it, and then, you know, we need to expand our settlement area? Or do we have this planned out, the settlement areas planned out for, you know, a decade, and those employment, they come to the township to find out what's available? That would be my first question. And I love the comment about the people seeking lifestyle of the smaller communities, yet our communities are growing at an unprecedented rate. So the smaller communities are no longer small, or won't be. The other question that I had is, Scott, with this growth management plan, what is the process for, we don't get involved in developing schools, but the schools need to have this information, because the Southgate is growing not so much in number of households, but in families occupying those households. How do we plan for, in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, to be able to accommodate the families going to school? So what is that process? Do we just send this off to the school boards? Maybe somebody can answer that for me. And my final question was your employment schedule, the one that said allocation of employment by land, use-based category. Does that factor in, I noticed the town of Blue Mountains is quite high. Does that factor in seasonal employment or year-round employment? Lots of questions. Thanks.
Okay, Scott?
Okay, yeah, thank you for those. Some excellent questions. So I tried to take notes. With respect to your first one on sort of the planning ahead and what comes first, you know, I don't like to admit this, but ideally, the planning, or not ideally, the planning process does take time. And in order to meet the needs of the development community, we really need to account for that time ahead of when we want shovels in the ground. So if we know that there's a process associated with expanding Dundalk and looking at new growth lands that would be currently on the periphery of Dundalk, we need to work with the township and make sure that that process gets done before you run out of land in Dundalk. And you know, we know that in higher growth communities, we do see developers starting to buy up farmland on the periphery of our settlement areas, hoping that they can then proceed with amendments, or that the township will proceed with amendments to bring those lands into the settlement areas. From a county perspective, you know, it's often ideal if either the county or the municipality can be the driver in that regard. That way you can be truly looking in all directions to see what is the most efficient land to bring into the fold that can be efficiently serviced and represents a logical extension to the settlement area versus what's a piece of land that developer A, B, or C owns and therefore, of course, wants it in the settlement area. So we're trying to work with our municipalities to truly plan ahead in that regard. And we think that documents like this will help give us the justification for looking at those changes. The planning policy framework restricts us to planning for 25-year increments. But in terms of our longer term infrastructure planning, we can and need to be looking beyond 20 and 25 years for that in that regard. With respect to your, I think your second comment about you know, many people are choosing to come to Gray and our smaller communities because they like that small town lifestyle. But as our communities grow and in some cases even explode, they become maybe less of the small town character that people chose to move from. We are seeing the impacts of this in a number of our communities, and we're seeing issues where you know, somebody moved to town 5-10 years ago. And now they're upset with the level of development that's coming into town because it wasn't the community they moved to. And in some cases, we've had neighbors and ratepayers associations form on that basis to preserve those the character of that small town. You know, I don't think growth and preserving the small town character and the charm of the community need to be mutually exclusive. But we definitely need to think in more detail about what that looks like. And certainly at the community level, beyond sort of the county level, you know, we need to work with the local community and local township staff to think about what's needed and what's important in the community in that regard. You know, and so some communities in the past have explored things like design guidelines. So if we are going to be seeing, you know, 3,000 new people in Dundalk in the next little while, do we need to look at some guidelines for how we ensure that added density still has character elements that are befitting of Dundalk in that regard, and then it doesn't start to feel like a nameless, faceless community that we might be used to seeing in other parts of Ontario that are in higher growth areas. So, you know, there's work to be done there, and there's certainly, you know, maybe an education and outreach component as well in terms of working with our community members to try to listen to them first and foremost about what they want to see in our communities, and then B, start to think about how we can achieve that through the planning mechanisms we have before us. With respect to your next comment on the schools, it's a great comment. 10 years ago, we were faced with a whole series of school closures across the county. And now we're seeing communities like Dundalk where presumably we're going to be looking at the exact reverse in the coming years. And so Randy actually sits on a committee, and as does a person called Brad Noble, who's our planning data analysis coordinator. I think I got that title right at the county. And they sit at a table that includes both of the school boards, both the Blue Water District School Board and the Catholic School Board in that regard, to look at opportunities to both share data in that regard. So what are we seeing in terms of growth? What are they seeing in terms of enrollment numbers? And then also truly plan ahead for what our needs are in that regard. And I'll just relay a recent anecdote from a development we did in Markdale, and it was shortly after they announced that the Markdale school Beavercrest had been saved, and there was a new subdivision being proposed next to there. And so the school board spoke up at that point as part of the planning process to say, hey, listen, if you're building a new subdivision here, we would like you to consider dedicating X number of acres to the school board to facilitate that new school build in that regard. So on a site-specific level, that's one of the mechanisms that the school board has available to them to look at acquiring the land for the new school. But on a more macro level, it's these conversations between the school boards, the counties, and our member municipalities in that regard, that truly makes sure that we're all in the loop in terms of both the amount of growth we're seeing, but also the type of growth we're seeing. So if we're seeing only retirees, then obviously we don't need more schools, but we know that's not the case in places like Dundalk, and therefore we do need to be thinking ahead and definitely sharing data. And as much as I said, we welcome Southgate's input on this draft growth management strategy. Some of the other key partners that we're looking for input from are our school boards. And I should also note that we do work very closely, more so on the economic development side of things, with our post-secondary institutions as well. And so Dave will be aware, because he sits at that table. We meet monthly with representatives from Georgian College to look at what their needs are and what the impacts of our growth are on their school population as well. And then finally, with respect to the employment question, my understanding is that those job numbers would include seasonal jobs. The way I've had it explained to me, and we can touch base with Hempston just to ensure, is that they're counting purely the number of jobs and not just the full-time jobs. So in Blue Mountains, for example, we do expect more of those service sector jobs and population-related jobs, and maybe less so on the employment land side of things in terms of new factories or business parks, and less so on some of the rural jobs in that regard. So that's my understanding of how they've treated the employment lands today. So hopefully that helps shed some light on some of your questions.
Thanks, Scott.
It does, thank you. May I have one follow-up?
Yep.
Thanks. So, and it's really not a question, but Deputy Mayor Milne, has raised the concern a couple of times now about farmland and agriculture and preserving that agriculture, because they have mandates to increase their production as well over a period of time. And the more farmland we lose to development, or whether that's employment or housing, the less we have available to produce food. So there is that balance that we need to consider. And the other, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. When we talk about the schools, one of the schools on Main Street is struggling and having to go through permit processes for portables already. Where one of the school has now, that used to go from 3 to 6, is now they're now in with the 6 to 8. It's like the balancing act of moving these children back and forth, and grade 3s walking that much further, or whatever that scenario is, but having to use portables to house them. And I mean, that's not the municipality. That's the school board. And we can give them as much information as possible so that they can plan now for the future, and be ready for that growth, the better. So thank you so much, both Randy and Scott, for your presentations. It's a little overwhelming, but great information. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands up. So I think we can move on to the next presentation. Thanks, guys. Randy, are you doing the climate change? There we go. Okay.
I am doing
Mayor
that.
Woodbury, just if I could interrupt, can we just have a motion to receive Scott's as information as the committee?
Okay. Is anyone moved by, I see Martin, seconded by Barbara. Any discussion on receiving that for information? Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. And that's carried. You want a motion now for the climate change, receiving that, Lindsay?
Yeah, that's easiest.
Okay, and so we'll need mover and seconder for that. Jim and Barbara. Okay, so that's on the floor. And Randy, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Woodbury. And good morning again, everyone. For those that I have not met, those on the line, my name is Randy Schertzer. I'm Director of Planning for Grey County. Hiba Hussein was one of the county planners who was instrumental in leading this project, and unfortunately she has taken another position at the City of Toronto. So normally she would provide an overview of where we're at with the Climate Change Action Plan, but unfortunately you're stuck with me today. So I will provide an overview of the project as best as I can, but no doubt won't be able to do as good of a job as she would have done for sure. So just to provide an overview of the project objectives of the Climate Change Action Plan, the first is to understand the current and projected greenhouse gas emissions, both corporately that we're producing at the County of Grey as part of our operations, as well as community-wide. The second is to develop greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and then to set goals for how to achieve those reductions. The next is to identify strategies and what we call realistic actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The next step is preparing the actual climate change action plan, which captures all that information that I mentioned. And then to partner with municipalities and other community partners to implement the action plan and to work towards achieving those targets. The county is using the FCM framework that has been developed in partnership actually with ICLEI Canada, and I'll say that ICLEI Canada is a leader in this regard, and we're fortunate enough to have them as our consultant helping us with this climate change action plan. They worked with FCM to develop this framework across Canada that municipalities are using in order to develop their action plans. So it's great to have their expertise as part of this project. The actual creation of the Climate Change Action Plan will meet the first 3 milestones, which are creating a baseline emissions inventory and forecast, setting emission reduction targets, and then developing a local action plan. The other 2 milestones are implementing the action plan and then monitoring progress and reporting results. We are targeting completion of a draft action plan in the next few weeks and a final plan by the fall of this year. This slide shows some of the tasks and the timelines for the project. And as you can see, we are in the third part of the project timeline. And as mentioned, we're basically at the stage of finalizing a draft of the climate change action plan. And I'll talk about next steps later on in the presentation. In terms of who we've engaged so far throughout the action plan project, those includes everyone from conservation authorities to public health units, municipal staff, neighboring counties. We've also engaged with a number of community climate action teams, local climate action groups that have been established, and there are several throughout the county. We've also engaged members of the public, which has been challenging through the pandemic, but we've reached out to the public through surveys and through what we call a workshop in a box. We've also engaged economic development staff and groups. Agriculture groups has been key to engagement to date, as well as going forward, including groups like Greg Services, Alice, the Grey County Federation of Agriculture. We've also connected with seniors groups, including the Council of Aging Grey Bruce, as well as utility companies, including Enbridge and Hydro One as an example. The Climate Change Action Plan has focused on both community emissions as well as corporate emissions. And the theme areas that the action plan focuses on in order to meet targets and goals include buildings, transportation, waste, agriculture, land use, energy, as well as protecting waterways and shorelines. Early on in the project, the county created a vision statement for the action plan, and this was informed based on early consultation, as well as engagement corporately, as well as with the community. And the vision statement for the action plan is that the County of Grey is a clear and visible climate leader, taking actions to address climate change throughout municipal operations and in the community. By embracing energy conservation, innovative solutions, promoting awareness, and working with residents and businesses, the county is creating a more prosperous, sustainable, and healthier future in Grey that is equitable, accessible, and inclusive of urban and rural lifestyles. There are two types of greenhouse gas emission inventories that have been captured as part of the action plan. The first is a community inventory. So this captures the greenhouse gas emissions produced from key sectors and businesses, as well as activities within the community as a whole. And then the second is our corporate inventory, which captures the greenhouse gas emissions associated with county government operations and services. For the corporate inventory, the action plan identifies greenhouse gas emissions in three main areas. One being the county-owned buildings and facilities, county-owned fleet or vehicles, as well as streetlights and traffic signals. So this shows the breakdown of energy consumed corporately by the County of Grey, as well as the total greenhouse gas emissions produced corporately. The baseline year that we have used is 2018, because when we started this project, the 2018 year was the most complete year from a data perspective in order to establish the baselines. And establishing the baselines is critical in order to be able to monitor where we're at in terms of our targets, which I'll get into in a little bit. The circle graph on the left-hand side shows the total energy consumed by county-owned assets. And as you can see, the majority of the energy that the corporation consumed was within our buildings and facilities, with a total consumption of 73% of our energy. Next is county-owned fleet, which is 21%. And then following that is streetlights and traffic signals that the county maintains, which consumes about 6% of our energy. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the circle graph on the right, that shows 60% of our total greenhouse gas emissions comes from our county-owned buildings, 39% from our fleet, and 1% from streetlights. In terms of community inventory, there are three categories of energy use and greenhouse gas emissions that were captured. First category is stationary energy use. This includes residential buildings throughout the county, commercial and institutional uses, industrial uses, as well as fugitive emissions. The second category is transportation. So that includes private vehicle use, public transit, as well as off-road transportation. And then the third category is waste, which includes solid waste as well as wastewater. So in 2018, Grey County's residents and businesses use a total of 8.5 million gigajoules of energy to heat and power their homes and buildings, as well as for transportation within the county. The energy consumed throughout the county in 2018 resulted in an overall energy expenditure of close to $258 million, which on an individual basis is approximately $2,670 per person per year. Therefore, reducing energy consumption throughout the community, whether that's in their building or transportation sector, will reduce the cost that our residents and businesses spend on energy each year. And this will help to keep energy dollars within the community. In 2018, the greenhouse gas emissions generated community-wide was approximately 775,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or 8 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per capita. Our agriculture sector is the highest at approximately 44% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. However, it is important to note that the agriculture sector can act both as a source of emissions as well as a sink for sequestering those emissions based on soil management and from crops, plants, and trees on farm properties. As diesel and gasoline have a relatively high emission intensity per gigajoule of energy, private vehicles accounted for 23% of emissions, which is a higher amount than our residential buildings and our commercial institutional buildings combined, with residential buildings coming in at 11% of the energy consumed, or emissions, sorry, and then the commercial institutional buildings represents 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Other emissions come from things like solid waste, off-road vehicles, industrial buildings, etc., as you can see there on the chart. In terms of emission reduction targets, there are some general practices that are used when developing targets, and I'll just outline some of those. The target should be specific to either your corporate operations or to the community at large. And the target should be ambitious, recognizing that the urgency of climate change and the need to act to avoid the severe impacts caused by climate change, as well as in order to protect the future interests of our communities. The target should be meaningful and connected to local contexts, including consideration of local circumstances, values, and priorities. They need to be measurable, including containing that baseline year, which, as I noted, is 2018 for our county action plan. As well, they should identify what year the targets are to be reached, and then the percent reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The targets must be adopted by council resolution, which is part of the requirements for the Partners for Climate Protection Program, which the county is a member of. This slide here shows what other municipalities in Ontario are doing with respect to greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, both corporately as well as community-wide. And as you can see, the targets vary by each municipality, and it also varies because of the different baseline years that each municipality or area is using. But generally, the targets look to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by anywhere from 20 to 30% by 2030 to 2035 for either corporate or community-wide targets, and anywhere from 47% to as high as 80% by 2050. The federal target is 30% below the 2005 base year by 2030, and 90% below 2005 by 2050. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change targets 45% below the 2010 baseline year by 2030, and 90% below 2010 by 2050. So these targets are draft, but currently what the county is considering for greenhouse gas reduction targets is shown here on the screen. So for corporate targets, it would be 20% below the 2018 greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and 60% below the 2018 greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And then for the community targets, it would be 15% below 2018 by 2030, and 50% below 2018 by 2050. So when you consider those based on the slide previous, we're about middle of the pack, about average in terms of some of the targets that we're recommending at this stage. Again, these are draft targets, and we'll be looking for any comments and feedback from the local municipalities, as well as the community as a whole, as to whether or not the targets are too low, too high, or just right. In order to achieve the targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, there are a number of draft community strategies that are being considered, and they are all based on several key themes or categories. And as you can see, the categories are very similar to the categories that were identified above in terms of the energy consumption and emission calculations. And this is because we've got great data for this information for these categories, and therefore can continue to monitor these categories on a go-forward basis. So again, these include buildings, transportation, waste, agriculture, land use, energy, and protection of waterways and shorelines. So I'll just touch on some of the strategies for each of these themes and categories that we're considering, both for community and corporate, just to give a sense of where we're going with respect to some of the strategies and actions within the action plan. So for the community strategies for buildings, the objective is to conserve energy by building cleaner, more efficient buildings, by retrofitting existing buildings, by creating indoor spaces that are more comfortable for residents, all while ensuring that policies are equitable and reduce energy poverty across our communities. Some of the strategies that are being explored for the building theme include energy efficiency retrofit programs, both for residential buildings as well as commercial and institutional buildings, creating what we're calling green standards for new buildings, working with industrial uses to create energy efficiencies or to explore energy efficiencies, as well as education and awareness programs on how we collectively can be more energy efficient. And you'll see the education awareness is a key strategy and action item for each of the categories. In terms of strategies for transportation from a community-wide perspective, the objective here is to transition the overall transportation sector in the county to low carbon vehicles and to increase participation in active transportation, reduce emissions, increase air quality, and to encourage healthy lifestyles while still increasing connectivity and mobility across all parts of the county. So some of the strategies under this category include electric vehicle adoption, and just hearing some of the announcements from some of the even large automobile providers, they're already moving in this direction already. So we're hoping to be able to piggyback on that work that our major automobile providers are working on. Also considering an electric vehicle car share program, encouraging active transportation by supporting infrastructure improvements, such as putting more paved shoulders on our roads and improving our overall trail network and system, as well as considering providing more transit opportunities within our rural areas, as well as rideshare programs and on-demand transit programs. In terms of waste strategies for the community, the objective here is to work with our local municipalities to support the good work that is already being done and to explore opportunities to further divert waste from landfills, such as a green bin program countywide, to establish innovative ways to create that circular economy in gray in terms of production of product to the life cycle of that product, and to work together with the overall community to manage our waste well into the future. Some of the draft strategies include collaborating with our local municipalities to support waste diversion, looking for opportunities to partner with existing reuse it and rebuild it centers, or to even look at establishing new centers, collaborate with local municipalities to support wastewater efficiency, and looking for opportunities for waste reduction, education, and awareness, and creating a program around that. For the agriculture strategies, we really want to build on the great work that our agriculture community is already doing to help reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. The objective is to prioritize the needs of farmers and provide support by developing resources and tools, as well as leveraging funding from on-site projects and new technologies, as well as, again, recognizing the importance of a vibrant, sustainable, and healthy farming community to grow both now and into the future. Some of the strategies include developing a climate adaptation plan. The focus of this current action plan that we're working on is a mitigation plan, which is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But we also want to look at creating an adaptation plan in terms of how we will need to adjust and adapt to our changing climate. And part of that work will be working with our agriculture community on ways where we can adapt to the changing climate, but also the other sectors and themes as well we want to explore through that adaptation plan. Another strategy is energy efficiency retrofits for the farming community, promoting biogas capture and conversion, promoting locally grown food, which is something that we're already working on with a number of agriculture organizations and with our economic development staff, and facilitating capacity building in the agriculture community by working with the already fantastic organizations and the great work that's already being done by Grey Ag Services, the Grey County Federation of Ag, as well as other key agricultural organizations. In terms of land use strategies, the objective here is to continue to promote compact mixed-use development, as well as integrating smart growth principles into land use planning processes, while preserving and expanding our natural areas to create healthy, vibrant, sustainable communities for our residents to live, work, and play. So some of the strategies we are looking at are reforestation, afforestation, habitat, and biodiversity protection, as well as looking at policies and innovative ways to support compact mixed-use development in designated settlement areas. And this will be through our official plan policies, both at the county and local municipal levels. In terms of energy strategies, we want to look at promoting renewable energy in the county that is owned and operated locally, has minimal impact on the surrounding landscape, and develops jobs locally and supports what we call energy independence. So the strategies would focus on encouraging and supporting the use of renewable energy such as solar, as well as developing a renewable energy policy. For protection of waterways and shoreline strategies, the objective is to ensure the protection of these features and to reduce the impact of flooding on local infrastructure. Some of the strategies that are being explored include preventing shoreline erosion, reducing the risk of flooding, conservation and protection of wetlands, as well as monitoring water quality within our waterways. And this will be important work that we partner with our conservation authorities on. They will be key partners with respect to implementing some of these strategies and actions because we're already building on the great work that they are already doing as well. With respect to the corporate strategies, so this is our county-owned assets, there are four main categories that we are looking at developing strategies for, which include stationary energy, waste, vehicle fleet and equipment, as well as municipal culture. For stationary energy, the objective here is to improve energy efficiency and energy conservation across all county-owned buildings, as well as within our operations, and to demonstrate leadership by implementing best practices. So in this case, it's about walking the talk. Some of the strategies that are being explored under this category include outdoor lighting conversion to LEDs, which I know we're already working on, as well as our local municipalities are working on. Looking for further efficiencies in our operations and maintenance in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Energy efficiency retrofits to existing county-owned buildings. Making any new buildings energy efficient, exploring opportunities to promote residential demonstration buildings to share best practices for being more energy efficient, as well as exploring renewable energy opportunities on county-owned properties and buildings. With respect to vehicle fleet and equipment strategies, the objective here is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and again to demonstrate leadership by transitioning our corporate fleet to low carbon vehicles. We're also looking at to reduce single passenger commuting of our workers and to encourage the use of different types of transportation modes, such as transit, walking, or biking to work, as well as improving fuel efficiency through improved operations and maintenance practices. Some of the strategies that are being explored here are as I mentioned, reducing single passenger commuting in private vehicles corporately, looking at our fleet operations maintenance practices and how we can make improvements to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and looking at opportunities to convert our vehicle fleet and equipment to electric vehicles where possible. With respect to waste corporate strategies, we want to reduce waste across all county operations and to encourage a behavioral change and create a culture of conservation. So we're exploring this by two strategies. One is a corporate waste policy, and the second strategy is around education and awareness to create that cultural and behavioral change that we would be looking for. In terms of municipal cultural strategies, we want to integrate climate change considerations across all county operations and infrastructure, and to foster a culture of conservation amongst county staff that promotes and encourages energy conservation and waste reduction. So some of the strategies we are exploring include developing a municipal climate lens so that we can integrate climate change considerations in any recommendations, decisions, or operational matters. Another key one is retaining and appointing an energy and climate change coordinator. And we are just in the process of going through that and hope to have the climate change coordinator hired this summer, as well as promoting a culture of conservation. This slide here just shows some examples of potential program areas that we feel we can partner with local municipalities as well as other community organizations on in order to achieve some of the targets and objectives that are being considered in the action plan. So the first one is what I just talked about, was developing that climate lens that I mentioned before, so that we are collectively making recommendations or decisions that look through that climate lens and understanding what impacts our recommendations and decisions could have from a climate change perspective. So for example, if we're looking at replacing some vehicles in our fleet, by applying a climate lens, we can start to consider electric vehicles or low carbon vehicles rather than just replacing it with a standard gas burning vehicle, for example. The second is a collective municipal awareness and education campaign on how we can implement best practices to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Another area is exploring opportunities for local renewable energy generation. And part of this is updating our official plan policies to allow for renewable energy, as well as looking for opportunities where we can retrofit our existing county and municipal buildings to include things like solar panels to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Also looking for opportunities to increase energy efficiency in municipal buildings, and again, sharing best practices. Designing roadways that are safe, accessible for all users. Expanding local transit options, and I know that's already underway with respect to the work that's being done both at the county as well as in Southgate. Supporting the use of more zero or low emission vehicles. Expanding initiatives to divert waste from landfills. Preserving our natural assets, exploring the development of electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the county, and I'll touch on this one further in the next slide, as well as partnering with conservation authorities and municipalities to strengthen the natural heritage and hazard mapping that we have in our in each of our jurisdictions. So there are a number of strategies that feed into projects that are already being worked on by the county and local municipalities. And these include things like converting our streetlights to LEDs, improving active transportation infrastructure, as well as policy updates in our official plans. As noted earlier, the county will soon be hiring a climate change coordinator, and we hope that person will be starting this summer. And that climate change coordinator will be instrumental in finalizing this draft action plan, as well as starting to implement the action plan and working with local municipalities and other organizations in order to start implementing the actions that will be identified. The county is also partnering with a number of groups in neighboring municipalities on what's called a regional electric vehicle charging network feasibility study. And we are submitting a funding application to FCM, and we hope to be able to receive some funds to support this project. Each partner is contributing funds toward the project, and this study will identify key areas where we can establish electric vehicle charging stations in order to support an overall network within our greater area, so to speak. In terms of next steps, the first one is to finalize the draft of the Climate Change Action Plan and to share this with municipal staff for review and comment. And we hope to be able to finalize that draft in the next week or two and to share that with municipal staff. We will then present the draft plan to our climate change task force and incorporate any comments that we've received from the local municipalities. We then want to consult with our community partners and the public on the draft plan by posting on our website, as well as connecting and outreaching to those people that have been involved in the project throughout. We will then revise the plan based on the comments received and prepare a final draft for County Council's consideration. And once Council's approved the action plan, the next steps will be to start implementing the plan, which again will be the key focus of the climate change coordinator. And of course, I'm happy to take any questions, but we also wanted to pose some questions to Southgate just to start thinking about how, from a Southgate perspective, how you see yourselves being part of this overall initiative. So you'll see some questions there on the screen in terms of, what is happening in Southgate with respect to climate change mitigation or adaptation, what may be missing from our action plan, how can the county collaborate with Southgate on this initiative, and how we can all work collectively to implement the strategies in the action plan, including working with not only between the county and local municipalities, but other key stakeholders and groups that will need to be a part of this initiative. So thank you for your time, and sorry, similar to Scott, sorry I rambled on here, but that's what happens when you invite planners to your meetings. So thank you, Chair Woodbury.
Thanks, Randy. It was very good. A lot of information there, so a lot to think about. Were there any questions or comments from council or from staff? Martin and then Barb.
Yeah, good morning, Randy. A lot of figures again. With the agriculture, you can play with numbers, and I'm glad you mentioned that the agriculture was 44%. But when you take into the fact that they have the soil and the trees and the land and management programs, it's not really that bad. I was reading a local paper, not from this area, a little farther south, and there's apparently a new federal greenhouse gas offset system coming down, and the agriculture can really look at this, and it says here in the article, it's a protocol for sustainable agricultural land management activities that reduce the GHGs and enhance soil. And basically, if the farmer can prove that he is lowering his gases and doing what he can, then he can sell those credits to other people who may not be able to, like industries. Would that be something that the county would be looking at if you're doing so well with your fleets and what have you? Would you be looking at selling credits off? So sometimes it always just comes down to money, this green climate stuff. It's called green for a reason sometimes, So is that in the plan for the future for carbon credits? Because it does say it is an offset system, and this was just an agricultural paper, so I'm imagining it could be applied to corporate, right?
Yeah, through you, Chair Woodbury. I think it's a great point. I'd be interested actually in seeing that article, and if you don't mind sharing that with me, Councillor Shipston.
Sure.
With respect to carbon credits, it's something that we've started to explore. We do mention it as part of our draft action plan. It's something that we need to look at, especially when things like our county forest properties. I know conservation authorities also own a lot of natural assets and properties that may qualify for things like carbon credits and other things. So it's something we definitely want to explore further with conservation authorities, with our local municipal partners, and now tying in this potential program, even our agricultural community, to see if this is something that should be explored. And I think like I mentioned, there's already a lot of great work that our agriculture community is already doing. And if we can take advantage of some of these programs and some of the grant funds, by having this action plan, we will be able to apply for some of that funding. So that's what we're really excited about, because then being able to get access to some of that funding, whether it's through things like carbon credits or through other grant funds that are coming out from the federal and provincial governments, we'll be able to hopefully implement some of these actions and maybe able to reach some of those targets even earlier than what we anticipated. So that's something that we definitely want to explore further for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Barb?
One more, if I
sorry.
may, Chair Woodbury.
Yeah, one more.
Just a simple question, Randy. I have never heard of fugitive emissions. What exactly are they?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I had to look it up as well. So this, let me just see. I copied it. It is. They basically, fugitive emissions are leaks or
Oh, yeah, makes sense.
releases of gas or vapors, usually from, they're saying from pressurized containment, so things like appliances, storage tanks, pipelines, wells, other pieces of equipment. So that's, it usually is tied to some industrial activities, but it can also be tied to some of those other things too. So that's the category of fugitive emissions. It's usually fairly low in most, but there's usually something that's factored in terms of part of our greenhouse gas emissions being from what we call those fugitive emissions. So.
Okay, would that include landfills too then?
No, that I think would be covered under the solid waste, waste category. Yeah.
Okay, and if I may, John, one more, and that's it from me. It says private vehicles in gray, 23% of emissions. Because of our geographic size, do you ever see that lowering even with plans for electric?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually, I was listening to a news broadcast early this morning as I was getting ready for work, and I think I heard a number that's nationally, I think it was about 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation across Canada. So we're in line. We're a little bit higher than I think the national average there, but I think with some of the programs that we've been hearing with automobile manufacturers already having plans in the next even 10 years to move towards and transition to electric vehicles as solely their production, I think that's going to help. We just then need the infrastructure to be able to support that, and that's where that study, as I mentioned, that we're partnering with Wellington County and some other neighboring counties, is to look at that network, that electric vehicle charging station network that we're going to need to have in order to be able to accommodate some of that transition from what we've been historically having as gas-powered vehicles to now electric vehicles. So I know personally, we just purchased a hybrid vehicle. So that's the in-between, I guess, and just seeing the savings there that we're seeing on just the hybrid model, let alone maybe going to an electric vehicle. Yeah, I think it's something that we definitely need to make sure that we're planning for. It goes back to even the growth management study, similar concepts. We need the services to be able to plan for our growth. In this case, we need our electric vehicle infrastructure in order to make sure that we're ready for the transitions that it sounds like automobile manufacturers are already planning and already doing. So we need to make sure we're ready for that.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Barb?
Thank you, Chair Woodbury. Hi, Randy.
Hi.
Just to piggyback on that regional electric charging station, vehicle charging station study, when you refer to consultation with neighbors, is Southgate part of that conversation, or are you talking about the neighboring counties as part of for a more robust network of charging stations?
Great question through you, Chair Woodbury. I think the partners, in terms of the funding partners that are contributing, are primarily the counties, but no doubt we need to have engagement on that study, and we're hoping we get the funding from FCM, but local municipalities will be key as part of that discussion to make sure that we're locating these electric vehicle charging station or identifying where those key areas should be, because they're throughout our communities. Obviously, we want them to be located in buildings and areas where they're close by, where people are already gathering. For example, grocery stores, maybe even community park areas and other things like that. So we just want to make sure that we're engaging local municipalities as well as others in terms of what makes sense when we're trying to locate some of these electric vehicle charging stations. So definitely we'll be connecting with local municipalities. We're hoping that we're applying for the funding now. So Wellington County is taking the lead on this project. So we're submitting the application to FCM now, and we hope to, if we get the funding, we'll be starting the project in August of this year to be completed in the spring of 2022. So that's the time frame we're looking at for that particular project.
Because I've always thought that Southgate, with it being a commuter town, with people going to the GTA, I mean, you can only travel so far on a charge. And I'm hearing from residents that the charging them overnight at home, just they're not getting a full charge. So being able to, you know, get to work and charge there so that you can get home, I think that would be of great value. I did have just a couple of things. When you talk about the green standards for new buildings, Randy, is that just our municipal buildings, the corporate buildings, or are we looking at establishing green standards for all new development so that the developers who are, you know, contributing to our, you know, growth, our residential growth, our 3,000 plus residents and or 1,200 homes, are they going to be bound by some green standards as well? Perhaps wastewater or gray water recapturing. I'm not so certain solar on roofs in a development area, but perhaps our on-farm shops would benefit from that type of green energy and reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a volume of on-farm shops continuing to crop up in our agricultural communities, which don't have natural gas and relying on diesel generators and propane. Will we be looking at limiting those numbers or requiring them to incorporate some green energy efficiencies? Those would be my questions.
Great.
What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair Woodbury. Great question again. And I think we want to look at the green building standards being applied to both county and municipal buildings, we hope, but also to all development, and looking for those opportunities where we can at least encourage some of the green building practices, and maybe even looking at incentives to be able to encourage developers to apply some of those green building standards. And there has been some other municipalities in the province that we were aware of that have developed similar standards. So we want to obviously research and be able to explore what they've worked on. And then the key people will be working with our chief building officials and our local municipalities to make sure that that whatever we're coming up with, the green building standards, is actually going to work locally from a local context and on the ground. So so that'll be a key step as part of that initiative. But yeah, our intent is to it be applied both from a county-owned municipal buildings perspective, and we really hope again that we'll be able to use some of those projects to be able to demonstrate, hey, here's what we were able to do, and then encourage others to also consider that, and maybe, like I said, encourage that through incentives to be able to move towards some of that adoption of the green building principles.
One follow-up?
Okay, yep, go ahead.
Thank you. So back to the on-farm shops, I mean, we do have a community that are very entrepreneurial, and, you know, kudos to them, but they also have a culture. I'm just, maybe that's something that Clinton will be looking at as well. You know, can we require that as, would the provincial policy statement even allow us to require green standards for something that's permitted under the provincial policy statement? I guess there's some questions to be asked there, so I'll look forward to that conversation. I mean, I'm not expecting an answer today, but these are things that we can look at throughout our municipality, throughout the county, but certainly Southgate is leading the way, I think, in on-farm shops. So one thing that we might be able to do there.
Definitely, and I think that would be a great suggestion, and we'd be happy to work with Clint and your chief building official staff and to explore that further, as well as the community to see if what we can incorporate as part of those on-farm diversified uses to make them more energy efficient. Because in the end, you know, if it's something that's maybe some initial short-term costs, but over time, if we can demonstrate, no, you're actually going to save on energy costs going forward, I think that's something that would be potentially attractive, especially if you throw in maybe some incentives to be able to provide something like that, or to take advantage of some of grant funding and other things that hopefully the province and federal governments will come up with. So that's something that we definitely want to explore as part of the overall green building initiative is on-farm businesses for sure.
Well, perhaps the government will come out with something similar to the grants for tiling. You know, the on-farm tiling, perhaps they'll come out with a grant for on-farm green energy too. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Dave, you have something?
Yeah, just to kind of tie a ribbon around these two presentations. Thanks, guys, for presenting. I will remember to set more time aside next time for planners. But we do sincerely appreciate your presentations, and I want to reflect on the climate change pieces. This is just session 101. You know, we're maybe getting down into the weeds on a few issues, but this is a culture change that we need to adopt as a community. And I think this has just begun. You know, buying a electric hybrid car in 2019 was just a little wee bit of an effort. We got to do a lot more, and in all decisions we make, consider climate change. So thanks for that. And we got one more presentation on asset management. I'm sure that will take as much time as any planner would put to it as well. So thanks a lot, guys. It was great presentations, both Scott and Randy, and we'll be in touch on this. I think what I'll do on your questions, I'm going to take that to our department heads and refine those answers and get something back to you. But I think the whole piece is working together as county as a lead for sure.
That'd be great. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Brian, I think you just wanted a quick comment before.
Just a real brief one here, talking about transportation. I think one that you've missed, and I think maybe it's pie in the sky, but it's a real opportunity here in Grey County, is the rail trail. I think there's, you know, I've talked to a lot of people, and they say they rue the day that they lifted the rails on that old CP line. And if you want to go back far enough, it's the old Grey Bruce Railway. I think there's an opportunity there to provide some kind of transportation in the future, whether it's light rail, heavy rail, whatever it is. I think that strategy should be explored, at least preliminary, to see the potential there.
Yep. Thanks, Brian.
Great.
Just before you guys go, thank you very much for those presentations. And I got to apologize, something I should have done right at the beginning. We have a new EDO, and I think I'd like to introduce her to everybody. Terry Murphy. I don't know if you're there with your camera, Terry, but she's started just this week. Really excited. There you are. Hi. Really excited about having her on board, and looking for great things to come. So just thought I'd show your face a little bit here, Terry, so that you at least know the planners and know they talk a lot if you have to call.
Well, it's great, and we look forward to working with Terry for sure. And whether it's our planning staff or our economic development staff, welcome, and we look forward to some future conversations for sure.
That's great. Thank you very much, and thanks for the reports and all you're doing. So we have that motion before council to accept this and to recommend the presentation be accepted by council. So is anyone opposed to that? Seeing none, that is carried. Thank you. And then next we'll move on to the asset management plan presentation. Moved by Brian, seconded by Barb. And Barb has her hand up still, so go ahead. Okay, I can answer that question very quickly because you're on mute still. Well,
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
I must have to turn it off twice. With no disrespect to Alan Selby, our asset management coordinator, could we have a 5-minute break? And I would also move a motion to go past noon just in case.
okay. Tell you what, let's take the 5-minute break and we'll move that motion as soon as we come back. That
Okay,
means
super.
everyone can get their coffee and go from there. So just a real quick 5 minutes because we got a lot to do and there are some
Absolutely.
pretty tight. So 10 after we'll be going again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oops. Hi, Alan. I think it's been about a year since we saw you the first time.
Probably about 8 months, yeah.
It's nice to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Okay, I've got 10 after. And I see Jim and Martin. Jason, you there?
I'm here, yep.
Okay, Barb. Looking for Michael and Brian. Okay, well, it's 10 after, so I'm going to call the meeting back to order because we do have quorum enough to start. Barb has moved a motion to go past noon. Do I have a seconder for that? Martin? And any discussion? Okay, so that is, or anyone opposed? That is carried. Okay, so I don't know if Liam wants to say anything, or we'll just turn it right over. There's Liam. Hi, Liam.
Hi.
So
Right
this
over
is
that one,
under
fine.
your report. So I'll.
Mr. Chair, do you want a mover and a seconder to put the presentation on the table?
We already got that prior to the break.
Oh, okay, terrific.
Okay, so I'll turn this over to
Who are the movers
Alan.
and seconders? Sorry, who are the movers and seconders?
It was Deputy Mayor Milne and yourself.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Milne back.
Deputy Mayor Milne, you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
There
right
now.
here. Thanks
Yep.
for your concern.
Yep, we'll turn it over to Alan.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm here to present the Southgate Asset Management Plan for core assets. You can see from the staff report, there's a little background there about the requirement from the province for everybody, every municipality to update their asset management plans. Then the deadlines for that were postponed by a year because of COVID. So they put it back from June of this year to June of next year, but we're carrying on under the original deadlines. And following this version, there'll be a second expanded version that takes in non-core assets like buildings and fleet. And the deadline on that is June of 23, but I expect that we'll be coming back to you with that expanded version in less than a year from now. So if everybody can see my screen, I'll just go through the slides. You've had the plan to look over, and I just have a few slides here where I just wanted to raise a couple of highlights from each section of the plan. And I guess we'll hold questions until the very end. Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
It looks like the mayor's on the phone, Alan. I'm sure that's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay, so the first slide I put in, first slide is a quote that I really like, and I thought it was appropriate for Southgate, is that asset management is not something new. Everyone's doing it. You have to be. In other words, you can't do a budget without doing some asset management. Otherwise, how do you know what projects you're going to put in your budget for next year? Like, which road are you going to do? which bridge are you going to do? Well, if you didn't have some asset management going on, you wouldn't know. But, and this is, I think, very true for Southgate, maybe you're not following a structured approach. And we're doing a lot of the things we should be doing, but maybe they need to be more formalized and put down on paper in some cases. So that's a good quote from Fort Francis, which is a comparable municipality. The AMP consists of several sections as prescribed by the province, and I'm going to go through them in sequence. I'm not Hempson. I'm not C.N. Watson. I'm a retired municipal treasurer, and I write in a more direct format, or I call it a non-consultant style. I've looked at a lot of other asset management plans over the last few months, and what you see in those a lot are what I call cookie cutter or motherhood statements about, this is what this means, and it's generic type stuff that you could put into almost any asset management plan. You have to do a little bit of that just to explain what you're talking about. But mostly as I wrote this, I tried to keep two questions in mind. Basically, what does this mean for Southgate? And what's realistic for Southgate? So as I wrote this, I kept thinking in those terms. So the first section is the introduction. Explains why we have to update our plan from legislation and the timeline deferral. The one point in the front section that I really liked about the legislation is that they've made it a requirement to do an annual progress review, so that once you pass an asset management plan by bylaw or whatever motion council does, you have to have a refresher or an update every year from your staff. Not a whole brand spanking new plan, but an update of what progress has Southgate made on the various aspects of asset management in the last year. I think that's something that's really been missing from a lot of municipalities. If you look through the internet and you look at asset management plans in other municipalities, the last one was done in 2013, 2014, 2016, whatever. And I venture to say that they've probably just been on a shelf since then. And council hasn't really heard anything since about asset management. And so the province put this clause in the legislation. I think it's excellent that that's not going to be the case anymore. Council's going to get an update every single year from now on. Section 2 is real meat and potatoes of this. It's the state of the infrastructure. So the core assets that we're dealing with are roads, structures, water, sewer, and stormwater systems. On the first page under section 2.1, I have a consolidated view of your core assets. And I think this is a bit of an eye-opener. I estimate the replacement value of the core assets for Southgate at $240 million. And I might be a little bit low on that. Of course, the biggest part of that is roads, and this is all types of roads. And then it goes on to explain the values I used for a hardtop road versus a gravel road. And then I have another little table in there where I picked out a few other municipalities and their last asset management plan and their road network and what value they put on it, just to double check myself that with the value of 114 million that I've put on here, that I was not out to lunch. I was in the ballpark. And if you look at a couple of the municipalities in that table, they have comparable amounts of hardtop kilometers, or there's one in the table that's West Grey, which is basically a road network that's double the size of Southgate's. And as you would expect, their valuation is about double Southgate's valuation. So I'm pretty confident that I've got accurate numbers here, other than with the waterworks and wastewater systems. That's a bit of a ballpark there. I used numbers that I found from a submission that Southgate made to Statistics Canada in the last couple of years. And I took the values from there. So the number of kilometers in the road system, there's a lot of good information here. I should just say that, I mean, you can go around to your constituents in the township and impress them with your knowledge now of the specifics. We've got 517.8 kilometers of roads, and that's up by about 5 kilometers from the last study, which was done 7 years ago. So we've been adding slightly less than a kilometer per year, and that would mostly be in your newly built subdivisions, not the most recent ones, but ones that were built in between the years, I'd say 2015 to 2018. Some of the more recent ones, we haven't assumed the roads yet, so they're not part of this. The roads are all class 4, 5, and 6, and there's an explanation of what that is. And more important than in this chapter about what assets we have providing services, but what condition are they in? That's what's really important. So fortunately, I had a roads need study from Triton from 2019, which gave me some reasonably up-to-date numbers to go by and condition ratings. And I have, of course, the Burnside bridge reports that are done every single year, half the inventory one year, half the next. So in the appendices here, there are tables that I've set up in a format that I thought was the most informative, which was a comparability format. So for each road section, by the way, there's 428 of them. And for each structure, and there's 118 structures, you see the condition rating most recently evaluated, and the one before that, and the one before that. So you can get a perspective of trends, and you can see, oh, well, this road got repaved. Well, yeah, its condition rating is back up to 100%. Makes sense. Or you can see the ones that are down. And I think there's some concern here in that overall, the number of roads that are considered just fair or poor is probably higher than what we'd like. And the number of structures that are considered fair or poor is probably higher than what we'd like. And if you look at those tables with the condition ratings, you see a lot of 5s, a lot of 6s, not too many 8s or 9s or 10s. And that's probably not a shock to you. Most of what's in here shouldn't really be a surprise, but it's good to have the information and to know where we're at. Under this 2.3 section on structures, I made a little comment in there about what the ministry, provincial ministry expects overall. And you can see that we're not close to that. And so there's certainly quite a bit of work to do. I don't mean to be discouraging. I'm just laying out the way things are. When it comes to the waterworks and the sewage systems, I don't have reports like I did for roads and structures. So I just went by the opinion of the public works staff. And we just used a very basic rating system from very good to very poor. And so I've itemized in this section the components of those systems and the rating according to the opinion of the staff. And I just noticed one little tiny thing I should change. This is just a little aside, but if you go to the very last page, the very end of the wastewater system, and it says inventory of manholes. I think I need to change that to maintenance holes. You're not supposed to say manholes anymore, I think. So we'll fix that up. And of course, the last point I made here is we know the reasons why things are the way they are. It's basically limited resources that the township has, both in terms of staff and in terms of money. And I think I can generally see the township is doing the best it can do within reason. This is where council comes in when it comes to what do we spend and what can the citizens tolerate. And we'll get to that later in the financial section, but I think everybody knows why things are the way they are. The next section is levels of service. In the legislation, it spells out some basic core levels of service measurements that you must do. And that's as far as I went with this. So we have those itemized here under each type of asset. And the comments are that we can expand on this list as time goes along. What we should do is look at asset management plans that come out from other municipalities that are comparable to Southgate and cherry pick some of the levels of service measurements that they are using that are appropriate for Southgate, and we'll start tracking those. In general, we haven't done this in the past, so we're just starting. So we may add some levels of service measurements, but it'll be from 2021 forward, because we probably don't have the data to find out what were these measurements in the past, because we've not been tracking it. There's also a comment in here about target levels of service. In other words, it's similar to the climate change people that just spoke. We know what the measurements are now. What if we set a target a little higher than what we have now? In other words, try to improve, like they talked about, trying to reduce the level of greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, you must be aware that if you're going to try to raise your level of service to a higher target, it's going to cost money. There's just no way around that. And I also would say that just maintaining the status quo is going to be challenge enough for Southgate when you consider the presentation on the growth management, and just consider how many more residents and users of our services there's going to be in the next few years. So just to maintain our assets in the kind of condition they're in now is going to be a challenge, because there's going to be those many more cars driving on the roads and the bridges, et cetera, et cetera. The demands are just going to go up. So just holding our own is going to be tough enough. The other point that has to be addressed in this section is risk. I have a table in here that's very commonly used, which is called a risk matrix. And lots of municipalities use this as a part of their budget preparation. So as they do their capital plan in their budget and they show each project they want to do over the next few years, in a lot of municipalities, there's a risk matrix that goes with each project as part of the backup support information, just to say we are putting this project in the first year or the second year of our capital plan, because this is the high level of risk that we see of this asset possibly failing. And so it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. And vice versa, this is why another project might be in year 8 of the 10-year plan. So risk is something that we haven't been doing formally, but I think we need to incorporate that into our annual capital budget preparations from this point forward, from 2022 forward. And the last point here is also in the legislation, they're going to require proposed levels of service. That's something that's going to require public consultation. It's down the road. It's even beyond 2024, but it's something to think about and work on over the next few years. In other words, you should go to the citizens and the residents and say, this is what we have today. Like, for example, we have a single ice pad arena. How strongly do you feel that we should have a twin ice pad arena? Or how strongly do you feel that we should have municipal tennis courts built that we don't have now? Or a second swimming pool? Or in other words, what kind of level of service do you want as residents, knowing that it's going to cost more money to increase that level of service to a proposed level of service? Section 4 is the asset strategy. And I like to think of this section as getting the best bang for your buck. In other words, they're saying that you need to do the best job you can to properly maintain the assets that you have so that they will service the citizens for what should be their normal entire life cycle. And they won't get worn out and beat up and fall apart before their time. So again, this is, I think, an example of something that is already being done by the staff in Public Works and other departments. They do keep on top of the state of their assets and they do maintain them. But it's very important because there's a little graph in here that I took, which is very common in lots of other plans where if you don't do the proper maintenance and perhaps a large repair partway through the life of the asset, that asset is going to fail at about 80 to 80% of its life instead of working for you for 100% of its life. So you need to stay on top of that. And the last point is when it comes to roads and structures, don't go by what they call the worst first strategy. In other words, I just go down the list from the consultants. I look at the road with the lowest pavement condition index or the bridge with the lowest bridge condition index, and that's the one I do next. That's a mistake, and that just is more expensive way of doing business. What you need to consider also is, well, where is that road or bridge located? How much is it used? How many people go over it in a day? Is it the most critical, one of the most critical roads we have or not? And I think a good example of this is a road you have called Orchardville. And it was, as you can tell by the table, the lowest rated PCI of all the roads in the network. But your Public Works Director advised you that this is not a good road to spend a lot of money on repaving. We're better off to convert this road back to gravel based on where it is and how much it's used. And that's a really good example that I was glad to see about avoiding this worst first strategy. Now, the next section is the financial strategy. And there's a little pyramid diagram in there that pretty much everybody uses, showing where you're at in terms of the financing of your assets. As a bare minimum, you've got to cover your operating costs and your debt payments and your amortization or depreciation costs. And even that's a flawed number because depreciation is based on historic costs, which in a lot of cases are really old and out of date. If you go through the asset register of the municipality that's used to produce your annual financial statements from the auditors, you've got all sorts of examples in there of bridges and roads with a value assigned to them that's not even close to what it would cost to rebuild or replace them today. So it's misleading to try to finance just your amortization level because it's based on an outdated number. And Southgate wasn't even at that point, right up until the year 2015. Since 2015, I give this council and the previous council a lot of credit. You've been stepping up to the plate and you've been substantially raising your tax support for capital budgets over the last few years to the point where you've gotten past this amortization point just by a little bit, but at least you're past it. But the top parts of that chart are where municipalities that are larger and have more resources are at. For instance, I've been at Dufferin County for the last 14 years, and I would say Dufferin's one of those fortunate, well-off municipalities. And we've been building all kinds of capital reserves in our annual budgets for jobs that aren't going to happen until 5 to 10 years from now. But they can do that because they've got the wherewithal to afford it. And what you end up with is large reserve balances and large cash balances on your balance sheet because you're building all kinds of money up for future jobs. Whereas other municipalities just put into their budget each year what they've absolutely got to do in the coming year. These jobs need to be done and there's just no way around it. And we'll raise in the budget what we have to get those jobs done. But there's no money for the jobs that are required in future years. Whereas with Dufferin and a lot of other big municipalities there are. And that's called the sinking fund method, which is beyond, I think, what Southgate can do. But what I really would like to push here is the concept of the infrastructure gap, which is all the things that ought to be done and what we can afford to do. Every municipality has an infrastructure gap. Just a little personal opinion here. One of the things I really don't like about a lot of other asset management plans out there is they do up a table showing how to get rid of that gap over the next 15 to 20 years. And it's a line graph and the gap gets smaller and smaller as you go. And they say, all you have to do is raise your taxes by 4 or 5% every year for the next 15 years, and you'll have that gap closed. Well, I don't believe those graphs. I don't believe that the gaps will ever be resolved. I believe realistically, all that you can do is take a step forward from the year before and keep moving forward and keep putting a little bit more in your budget towards capital assets than you did the year before. And don't go through a period of years where you stand still or heaven forbid you go backwards. Most municipalities did that in the period, I would say, from about 1995 to about 2005. I was the municipal treasurer in those years, and I know that the key point of view for most councils then was keep your taxes down. It was the era of Mike Harris in Ontario, and it was all about downloading. And here's a couple more roads, municipality, that you now have to look after. We, the province, who used to look after them, we're not going to anymore. Here's a little bit of money to get you through maybe a year or two, and then you're stuck with it forever after that. There was a lot of that going on. And municipalities just were struggling just to keep up with that. And didn't want to raise their taxes. Since about, I'd say about 2005, the awareness of asset management has started to grow. You can see how the federal and provincial governments are aware of it by several actions they've taken since then, and I list them in the report. And by the way, that makes me remember, I wanted to mention that the federal government just announced in their recent budget a few weeks ago that they're doubling the gas tax money again this year. Now, Southgate's already set their budget for this year with using gas tax equal to what we were expecting to get. We're going to get double that. So you'll have some extra gas tax money in the bank from the feds at the end of 21, and that should be factored into your capital budgets in 22 and beyond. And that's not the first time the federal government's done that. And the province has done some things, including, surprise, surprise, uploading rather than downloading. I remember at the county in 2009 and 10, there was a panel that was put together. Hazel McCallion was on it and a bunch of other municipal reps. And they got the province to upload the 20% share of social services costs, basically Ontario Works or welfare payments. That used to be on the municipalities. Now it's zero on the municipalities. And they phased that 20% out or uploaded it over a few years. So the province and the feds have done things to recognize this IGAP problem, and so has Southgate. But my message to you is keep it up. And you've got some pretty ambitious targets already in your 10-year capital plan. And I encourage you to try your best to stick to those targets and don't whittle them down in order to keep your tax increases smaller. Do the best you can. I mean, things like COVID are going to come along and upset the apple cart. I'm sure you're going to see all sorts of municipalities pushing projects back a year from the year they plan to do them in response to COVID. You know, we're just not going to get that done in 2021 because of the way things are. But as much as you can, as best as you can, try and stick to those targets. I think they're ambitious. I think they're about as far as you can go financially, and I encourage you to stick to them. Now, the next section I found really interesting. This was not in any asset management plans before. It's new in the legislation, which is to address climate change as part of your asset management plan. Everybody has to do this now. You've just had your presentation from the county's point of view and them working toward a climate change action plan. I mentioned in the report here several other municipalities that have already finished their climate change action plans. You can go online and look at them. But I really had my eyes opened when I was doing this section. I had no idea the volume of work that's already been done on climate change. That's, in general, it's called climate science. And I did attend a course courtesy of the township, thank you very much, that was put on by Amont, Asset Management Ontario. They're based out of Oakville. They've been around for about 15 years, and they had a multi-session course on climate change and asset management, which just wrapped up. And I learned all kinds of stuff that I didn't even know was out there. And one thing were these two websites, and I referenced them in the report. I encourage you to go and look at them, play around with them. They're chock full of good data. climateatlas.ca and climatedata.ca. And they do all these measurements based on different scenarios in terms of lots of effort is going to be made in the next few years to address climate change. Another scenario is some effort's going to be made, but just moderate. And another scenario being we're not going to do anything. We're just going to carry on business the way we are today. And what would be the results based on their modeling? And I have a table in here showing you specifically for Southgate, because you can zero in on any geographic location that you want, what they forecast for the period of now till 2050 and 2050 to 2080. And it's interesting to me to find that the most significant impact they're forecasting for our area is temperature, and not so much precipitation. Precipitation may go up a little bit, but not that much. Precipitation is more about, you're not going to get a whole lot more per year in precipitation, but you're going to get it in shorter, more violent bursts, that you get hit with a really big, heavy storm, and then you're in a drought for 3 weeks. And by the time you get to the end of the year, you're at about the same annual total of precip that you normally are. So there's also a section in there on measurements that are strictly focused on agriculture. Because I know some of you with the farm background, I could tell from your earlier questions. And so they measure things like the number of frost-free days in the season, or the date of the first frost. And finally, I put a little comment in here that I think you always have to consider when you're looking at these models, is all models are wrong, but some of them are informative. It's true, no predictions are going to be right, but you can learn a lot from them. So when it comes to asset management and climate change, the 4 main points are the exposure that we have, how exposed are our assets, how vulnerable are our assets, what is our resiliency, what do we have in place to bounce back from a big storm or other weather-related event, and what adaptation, and that's a lot of what you just heard in the previous session, what adaptations are we doing to address climate change? Just as an aside, if you go down to Orangeville, you know where the Walmart is, and the big Leon store and the Scotiabank, that plaza there, the town has put in, I think, a half a dozen electric vehicle charging stations in the middle of that parking lot. Next time you drive through that parking lot, you'll see them. And they've done quite a bit of work so far in Orangeville, developing their climate change action plan, and part of it is the conversion of their vehicle fleet to electric, and they've already put charging stations in the ground in place as part of that. So they're moving along, as are obviously other places that are even bigger than Orangeville. So I just thought I'd throw that in. Next time you're in that neighborhood, have a look. Green infrastructure is the last part of this section, which is a whole area that I don't think has gotten too much attention in the past. This is talking about municipal assets that you might not think of as assets, like your forests, your trees. And this is a whole big area on its own, talking about putting solar panels on municipal buildings, updating your energy efficiencies, because that's a good point too that they raised. I thought of that too. If you think of every municipal building that we have, think of what year it was built. Think about what were the building code standards that year compared to what are the building code standards today. And that's where you'll find, I think, potentially a lot of opportunities to upgrade, save money, and be more energy efficient with buildings, especially for a county like Gray, which has a lot of social housing buildings, residential apartment buildings. It's even more important for them. So green infrastructure is something I think we're all going to hear a lot more about. A couple interesting other points I found was one of the speakers at the course was from the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and they were talking about the impact on insurance claims of climate-related damages. And I was a little stunned to see the average claims have gone from around $400 million a year in the 90s to averaging $1.8 billion per year averaging between 09 and 2017. So it's more than quadrupled in that 25-year period. So that, to me, that was stunning. And they said that's insured losses. They say for every $1 of insured losses, there's $3 to $4 of uninsured losses. So, I mean, it's stunning to think about. And they also say the benefits of investing in climate change resilience outweighs your costs of not doing it by 6 to 1. I'm not sure about that, but that's the common refrain in this area. So climate change, I encourage you to look into that. I found it really fascinating. Glad to see that the county is moving ahead on it. And we'll see what happens. And finally, I get to next steps. So obviously we want to put this asset management plan in place as a guidance document adopted by bylaw as per the staff report. Then after that's done, spend the next period of time making improvements to our data collection and analysis. I found a lot of good data, but I did not find as much data as I was hoping to find, especially when it came to water and sewer operations. I'd like to get much better data and analysis on those systems over the next year. And I'm working with your MDW system to update the asset data. I've already done all the roads and all the bridges, and I'm doing the vehicles now. And then I'll move on to buildings. So the annual reviews, I expect that we'll come back to you each year and report to you on what progress has been made in specific terms about asset management compared to a year ago. What data collection improvements have we made? What new information have we learned from other municipalities and through staff training? And we'll stay on top of the whole asset management scenario. You know, what have we done budget-wise in terms of enhancing our budget support of assets? So finally, there's a series of appendices attached here. There's the legislation. There's the Southgate policy that was adopted in 2019, and Councillor Dobreen pointed out to me there's a couple of typos in that policy. Now, this policy was actually adopted in 2019, so it was probably Liam or Dave was involved in that. So I'd ask them to go back and double check that. In particular, the councillor pointed out there's kind of a hanging clause there at the end of point 2, the purpose paragraph, with a semicolon and nothing after it. So I think there was supposed to be something there, and it got left out. For the clerk's reference or the CAO's reference, this is actually in Southgate Bylaw 2019-090. So if we fix up this policy document, you'd have to also fix up that bylaw, 090. And then I have the detailed road segment lists and your detailed structures list showing the condition ratings and the historical condition ratings, so you can see the trends. And I also intend to work on developing better asset data on the water and sewer assets. I just want to go back, sorry to double back, but one thing I wanted to say that I forgot. In the financial area, I had a talk in there about debt and the water and sewer assets and the number of very large projects that are on the near-term horizon for the township, of which there's probably a lot of borrowing that's going to be required. That's not a bad thing when you are upgrading or putting in place a new asset that's going to last for years and years. Borrowing makes sense because then you're stretching the cost of that asset out for years and years, as opposed to charging all the taxpayers that just happen to live in Southgate in the year that you build this asset, like a water tower, and they're not going to necessarily still be in Southgate over the years that water tower is functioning. So it's not really fair that they should pay for the whole shot because they happen to be there in the year it was built. So borrowing makes sense, and interest rates, of course, are favorable right now, but who knows how long that's going to last. So I just wanted to raise that point. You also have some borrowing in your capital budgets for routine type projects, like a road replacement or a bridge replacement. That's generally something that's frowned on. I know why it's there. Liam would probably agree. It's there because you had to turn to borrowing to fit that project in, and he was probably told by the relevant department head that no, you can't put that project off another year. It's got to be in this year. So how do you fit it in? Well, you have to borrow what we're short by. But generally, that's not a good sign. That's a sign of underfunding your capital tax support that causes you to have to borrow for a regular annual type job, as opposed to building a brand new asset where borrowing does make sense. So I just wanted to point that out. And my last slide is, what can a well-defined asset management process do for Southgate? Well, it'll give us better data, more formalized and structured, and that will make the decisions that council has to make in the future evidence-based and defendable. So somebody from some resident comes to you and said, why are you doing this? You've got some hard data to show them to defend why you're doing what you're doing. Here's the risk evaluation that we had for that asset, or something like that. So you've got something hard to turn to support your actions. A longer term view is important. That relates back to your 10-year capital plan and trying to move a little bit ahead year after year. Cost efficiency, that goes back to the asset strategy chapter, and that's basically looking after your assets so you're running things at the most cost efficient way that you can. And risk management, which is a concept that we may have been doing indirectly, but now we really should try to make it hard and concrete in terms of risk evaluations and measurements. And so thank you very much for your time. And I know we're going to go over, but thank you for that motion to allow us to go over. And I'll turn it over to the chair for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Lots of good information in there, and it's nice to see that what was started before without somebody actually specializing in doing the asset management, pulling it together, has laid the foundation, and you pulling it together like this is really kind of giving us more, like you say, information to move forward and come out with the policies and that we need to. So thank you very much. Dave, I know you have to leave at noon, or you may have left already. If there was anything you had to say to go with that? No, I think I just missed them. Okay, are there any questions or comments from council? Okay. Brian.
Thanks, John. Just a couple comments, I guess. Very good information. Thanks you, Alan, for the presentation. I guess if we've been paying attention the last little while, nothing on there should come as a surprise, but it was well reinforced. Thank you, Alan. The one thing I would suggest is that if you know, going forward, to make sure that the community understands why we do some of the things that we do and why we prioritize things the way we do, I think there needs to be some kind of communication strategy to the community to allow them to understand just what you've outlined there, basically, and why we're financing the things we are financing, and again, why we're prioritizing certain things, because it's not easily understandable if all you see is your tax number on your bill. And that's the political reality that councillors face, is the political reality of what can people afford. And I think there's a number of hard decisions that will need to be made going forward, and they won't be easy. But anyway, those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Alan.
Just want to respond to that. That's an excellent point. I forgot to mention, but it's in the legislation, that this asset management plan information must be shared with the public. The province wrote it right into the legislation. And obviously the typical way of doing that is, once you adopt your asset management plan, it must be put on your website so people can go on the website and look at it. But public consultation is a very important point, and something to be considered for the future as we expand on this plan.
Absolutely, thank you. Barbara?
Thank you, Chair Woodbury. And to that point, making this available, to Deputy Mayor Milne's point, making this available on the website or having public consultations in Southgate doesn't guarantee that people actually understand year over year why we are prioritizing what we are prioritizing, why we are not staying to a cost of living increase in order to meet our asset management objectives. I'm going to tag on to Brian's comment or ideas that how can we do a top level on maybe the tax bill, this is where your dollars are going, or the breakdown. We did that, I think, one year. Liam provided an overview of our taxation increase and our controllable versus uncontrollable percentages. So this was a very detailed but easily understood document, Alan. I appreciate the layman's terms that you employed. But to Brian's point, how do we get this across to our residents who phone us or email us, complaining about the tax increase? Just something that we can consider going forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Martin?
Thanks, John. Yeah, not so much questions, but just, again, Alan, thank you for the report. There is a lot of data again. It's like, holy smokes, what a morning. But I just got the impression off the report is that it's such a balancing act. Like with the comments about roads not being used, and the studies saying, oh, there's only so many during a day. But you can also take the other tack that, yeah, there's not a lot of traffic, but what traffic it is, it's bigger trucks and heavier farm equipment. So how do you really quantify that, right? I'm glad you mentioned the green infrastructure. I do believe you can qualify and quantify that as having a value, and to work with what hard infrastructure we have now to complement, because I think that's a thing that will help mitigate these flash storms. And I'm really appreciative of the fact that you said the annual precipitation won't change. It's the how it comes. So you get those 3 months of nothing, and then 2 days of thunderstorms that totally wipe out any soil on the farmland. I'm not a farmer, but I could see that happening. And I also really appreciated, you mentioned on page 93, I believe, you talked about when you were talking about debt, and when those debt payments are retired, you don't make a windfall. Like, I'm a taxpayer, I would like a windfall, but you mentioned to put that back. It's only been paid out for all those years. Keep it at the status quo to put back for the future. So I agree with Brian and Barb. It was a lot of information, but written in a way that I could read it. So I appreciate it very much. It was a good report.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you, Martin. Alan?
I just want to respond to that. In Dufferin County, as you probably know, we built the Dufferin Oaks Home for the Aged back in 2002. And we took out a big debt on that, or you could call it a mortgage, basically, which is normal for a brand new municipal building. And that was for 15 years. So it ran out in 2017, and it was a pretty large annual debt payment on the county budget. And all of a sudden, it's off. And what did we do? We did not lower taxes by 2%. We shifted that money that we were putting towards debt payments, principal and interest, and started building a reserve for the Dufferin Oaks, for all the components of the building and the equipment, etc. So building an asset reserve, we held the tax constant. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's a great example of what I'm talking about in this recommendation. I didn't mention that there is a sheet of recommendations at the end of this report, a couple dozen of them, things that I think are not hard to do and well within the ability of Southgate to implement. And I think this will be a part of, if you adopt those recommendations or support them, this will be a part of that annual review. We can report back to council each year and say, well, what progress have you made on those recommendations that you had in the asset management plan? And one of them, like you say, is shifting the cost of debt payments when they expire over to another purpose and not just rebating back to the taxpayer. It's good financial policy.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Yeah. Okay. Nope. Barb?
Yeah, Barb had her hand up.
You're muted.
That's where I took it off. Sorry about that. To that point about moving once your debt has been paid off and moving that debt payment into a reserve, to you or to Liam, would that also apply to where we have been designating funds for the Markdale Hospital, where we had made a commitment of $400,000, and now that we're going to be paying that, and that $20,000 or $40,000 that we might have been setting aside year over year to reach that goal will no longer be required for the Markdale Hospital. But it's not just debt that you're talking about, it's anything that we have on the books where we might have been paying for the Mount Forest Sports Complex for a 10-year period. That commitment is no longer required. We could be putting that toward a reserve. So any kind of long-term payment plan, whether that's debt or just earmarking funds, is that what you're referring to?
Go ahead, Alan, if you want to answer that.
That would be another good example. It's not just debt payments. It could be any kind of long-running financial commitment that the township has had that it's expiring. So it could be, yes, past ongoing annual support for a local organization or a hospital or whatever the council has chosen to support in the past. And yes, same thing. Same idea applies. When it expires, shift that money over towards your capital budget. It allows you to get more capital done without raising taxes.
Thank you.
Okay, Liam?
And Southgate already does that. That's why I present you a capital and special project budget. So anything that is not regular daily annual operating basis is sort of grouped over there in that capital and special projects. So there's $2 million raised from taxation for that kind of capital and special project program. So it wants as you said, like we're contributing to the Markdale Hospital. If and when that stops, then those funds would stay in that $2 million envelope and just get redirected to another need.
Thanks, Liam.
Awesome. Thank you, Liam.
Okay, not seeing any more. Thank you very much, Alan and Liam, for all that information. I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to this motion? Well, that carried. Now I'll entertain a motion to go back to the special council meeting. Moved by Michael, seconded by Brian. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Okay, we're back to the regular council meeting at 12:11, and we have some motions that the growth management study presentation be accepted for information. Need a mover and seconder. Jim and Michael. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? That is carried. Next, that we accept the climate change action plan presentation for information. Mover and seconder, please. Martin and Brian. Any discussion? Okay, anyone opposed? That is carried. Thank you. And then we'll need a mover and seconder for receiving the asset management plan as information and to consider the asset management plan as bylaw June 2nd meeting. Mover and seconder for that, please. Barbara?
I'll second it, John.
And Jason. Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, anyone opposed to that motion? Thank you. That is carried. Next, we have confirming bylaw. Need a mover and seconder for that. Michael and Jim. Any discussion? Is anyone opposed to that motion? Okay, that is carried. Just like to thank everybody. There's a lot of information, but it's a lot of information going forward that we'll be referring to for quite a while. Next, I have a motion by Brian. Oh, go ahead, Barb. Go ahead, Barb.
I can no longer see everyone. The screen is still being shared by Alan, but doesn't the confirming bylaw require us to vote? Because it's a bylaw?
Yep, we can have Lindsay do that. Go ahead, Lindsay. You would like to do the vote
Thank you,
on
Mayor.
that?
Yep, we can.
I think you're muted. There.
Oh, sorry, I was. Yep. Recorded vote for the confirming bylaw. Councillor Shipston?
Yes.
Councillor Rice?
Yes.
Councillor Dobreen?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Milne?
You betcha.
Councillor Shearson?
Yes.
Mayor Woodbury?
Yep.
Counselor Frew,
Yes.
by a vote of 7 to 0, that's carried.
Okay, thank you. And like I was saying, we have a motion moved by Brian that we adjourn at 12:14. So thank you very much, everybody. And like I say, a lot done today, I think. A lot to think about. But don't stay up at night thinking about it. Okay, take care.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye now.
But